Chapter 1379. Jianmu's advancement. Looking at Jianmu's scarlet eyes, old man Tiandu's heart trembled. Jianmu's eyes were filled with madness and brutality. Even old man Tiandu felt a trace of fear when he looked at Jianmu. Jianmu, calm down. The door of the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Palace has been completely closed. You can't enter. Moreover, the ice and fire energy on the surface is constantly increasing. If you stay here for too long, it will cause permanent damage to your meridians. Old man Tiandu's face was extremely gloomy as he secretly warned Jianmu. Go away. Jianmu roared as the law of ruthlessness erupted from his body. His clothes fluttered and his hair danced in the wind. The countless vines released by the old man of Tiandu were all shattered by this power. Old man Tiandu's pupils shrank. He took a few steps back and stared at Jianmu solemnly. At that moment, Jianmu's aura became more and more frightening. Like a flood or a ferocious beast, he rushed over with a force that could topple mountains and overturn seas. The law of ruthlessness that emerged from his body was like the sharpest blade in winter, causing many of the surrounding disciples to feel their skin turn cold. Moreover, the law of ruthlessness's power was getting stronger and stronger, stimulating everyone's eyes. Rumble. Suddenly, everyone was stunned to see countless clouds in the sky above Jianmu. These clouds spiraled in a clockwise direction. At the center of the clouds was an extremely terrifying law of ruthlessness. As the clouds spiraled, the law of ruthlessness began to condense. In the end, it turned into a huge invisible longsword that suddenly fell and hovered behind Jianmu. Boom! The moment the invisible longsword landed on Jianmu's back, a ruthless intent spread out with Jianmu as the center. Terrifying waves of air overflowed in a circular manner. The law of ruthlessness has descended from the heavens. Jianmu has completely comprehended the law of ruthlessness and become an invincible sovereign lord. Old man Tiandu steadied himself and stared at Jianmu, who was quietly floating in the midst of the law of ruthlessness. He didn't expect Jianmu to completely comprehend the law of ruthlessness at this time and step into the invincible sovereign lord realm. Jianmu slowly opened his eyes. In the depths of his pupils, there was a deep sense of ruthlessness. Then he reached out with his right hand and placed the longsword on his back again. Then, he grabbed the longsword formed by the law of ruthlessness descending from the sky. This emotionless sword was very long. It was several times longer than Jianmu's body, reaching a length of several zhang. Break! Jianmu coldly spat out these words. With a twist of his right hand, he gripped the hilt of his sword and took a step forward with his right foot. The sword swung with his body and slammed heavily into the entrance of the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Palace. Boom! Boom! Following that, everyone from the inner yard was shocked to discover that the entire Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Palace was trembling violently. After Jianmu had become an invincible sovereign lord and grasped the law of emotionlessness, he was able to unleash such terrifying power. He was probably comparable to old man Tiandu, although elder Tiandu was a half-step saint. The law he had mastered was only the law of wood of the 5 elements. It was the most common law, and there was a huge gap between it and a special law like the law of ruthlessness. Even if old man Tiandu's cultivation was higher than Jianmu's, the gap between the two wasn't as big as imagined. Stop, Jianmu. Even if you've become an invincible sovereign lord, you can't break open the entrance of the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Palace. Come back. Old man Tiandu naturally wouldn't let Jianmu continue to do such a foolish thing. He roared angrily and took a step forward. The terrifying law of wood lingered in his hands. Suddenly, a huge hand wrapped in tree branches stretched out from the ground and swept towards Jianmu. Jianmu narrowed his eyes and slashed the emotionless sword behind him. Instantly, a sword shadow crossed the sky and stabbed towards the huge hand formed by the tree branches. Boom! 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 In an instant, the tree branch hand was completely annihilated by this attack, disintegrating into nothingness. How terrifying! Looking at Jianmu's attack, many of the surrounding disciples were stunned. Jianmu, who had grasped the law of emotionlessness, was too terrifying. Sword cultivator, coupled with the law of emotionlessness, the strength Jianmu can unleash is beyond everyone's imagination. On the sky capital peak, Yang Yi leaned against a stone pillar and narrowed his eyes as he watched the battle between Jianmu and Old Man Tian. There was a hint of admiration in his eyes. Eldest senior brother, you're still in the mood to make irresponsible remarks here? Why don't you go and help master? Jianmu has completely gone crazy. Feng Nianlan said to the lazy Yang Yi in a somewhat exasperated manner. Yang Yi shook his head and yawned. It's good to let Jianmu go crazy. Don't you think the battle between Jianmu and Old Man Tian is a good show? Why should I stop it? Feng Nianlan was speechless. Boom, boom, boom. Jianmu had almost gone crazy and was actually fighting with Old Man Tian. Between the two, extremely terrifying law power was emitted. Under the influence of this law power, the surrounding space collapsed and collapsed. It was extremely terrifying. Countless disciples of the Nine Peaks watched this scene in horror. They didn't expect that Jianmu, who had grasped the law of emotionlessness and had just become an invincible sovereign lord, could actually fight Old Man Tian to such an extent. Moreover, some disciples with sharp eyes even noticed that as the battle continued, Old Man Tian was actually at a disadvantage. Jianmu has just become an invincible sovereign lord, so his control over the law of emotionlessness isn't very skillful. When he fully grasps the law of emotionlessness, Old Man Tian will probably be crushed. Yang Yi leaned against the stone pillar, his eyes still drowsy, and his voice was lazy, as if there was nothing in the world that could make this guy excited. Feng Nianlan looked at Yang Yi in surprise. It turned out that the latter was holding this goal. He didn't stop Jianmu, so that he could use the battle to master the law of emotionlessness. However, this guy really didn't put her master, Old Man Tian, in his eyes. He actually used her master to test Jianmu's combat strength. I almost forgot. Eldest senior brother seems to have never put master in his eyes. Feng Nianlan held her forehead, realizing that her actions just now were too stupid. Jianmu is so strong. He's actually starting to suppress Old Man Tian. This. There was an uproar in the surroundings. Everyone discovered that Jianmu and Old Man Tian, who should have been evenly matched, had now completely suppressed Old Man Tian. Yanji naturally noticed the abnormality here, but he, Wenbai, and Jiang Xian were presiding over the ceiling of the Ice and Fire Duel Extremes Palace. They simply couldn't free up their hands to stop the battle between Jianmu and Old Man Tian. Du Xiaoyu, Lu Yuanhua. The two of you go and assist Tian. The Ice and Fire Duel Extremes Palace is about to be sealed. Take Jianmu away immediately. Yanji frowned slightly and ordered Lu Yuanhua and Xiaoyu, who were not far away. Lu Yuanhua and Xiaoyu looked at each other and responded in unison. They each unleashed their own law powers and rushed towards the battle between Jianmu and Old Man Tian. The law of fire emerged around Xiaoyu's body, while Lu Yuanhua grasped the law of gold. As soon as this law was used, his entire body was covered in golden light, as if he was made of gold and stone. It was extremely majestic and powerful. It's the Peak Master of Ao Yuan Peak, Xiaoyu, and the Peak Master of Divine Devil Peak, Lu Yuanhua. With the two of them joining in, I'm afraid Jianmu will be stopped. Many disciples in the inner courtyard saw Xiaoyu and Lu Yuanhua rushing over. Their eyes turned cold as they discussed spiritedly. Boom, boom, boom. Once Lu Yuanhua and Xiaoyu joined in, Old Man Tian, who had been suppressed, finally breathed a sigh of relief. The pressure on his body also lessened a lot. Jianmu, who originally had the upper hand, was completely at a disadvantage after Lu Yuanhua and Xiaoyu joined in. Even though he was madly waving the emotionless long sword in his hand, he simply couldn't withstand the joint attack of the three Peak Masters. Boom! Jianmu let out a muffled groan and flew backwards. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face turned as pale as snow. The emotionless long sword in his right hand directly collapsed into nothingness at this moment. Swoosh! Countless vines swept out from the void and wrapped around Jianmu's limbs, making him unable to move at all. Let me go! Jianmu roared and struggled with all his might, but he simply couldn't break free from the vines that wrapped around him from all directions. He stared at Old Man Tian and the other two with red eyes. So, Old Man Tian came to Jianmu's side. Seeing the crazed look in the former's eyes, he gave a soft sigh and said, "This little guy seems to have deep feelings, just like that little girl Chen Shui." Thinking of the beautiful figure that rushed into the ice and fire dual polarity palace without hesitation, old man Tian Du's eyes were filled with grief. Mu Chen Shui was a direct disciple that he valued greatly, but because of that Zhuowen, she had actually entered the ice and fire dual polarity palace. Adding in the fact that the ice and fire energy in the ice and fire dual polarity palace was so wild, old man Tian Du knew that Mu Chen Shui's chances of survival were very slim. It's all that Zhuowen's fault. It's fine if that guy dies, but he actually implicated that girl Chen Shui. Thinking of this, old man Tian Du was a little angry. He couldn't help glaring at Xiao Yu not far away, making the latter confused. Rumble. After old man Tian Du led Jian Mu away from the ice and fire dual polarity palace, the ice and fire energy on the surface of the ice and fire dual polarity palace gradually extinguished. A sealing force covered the ice and fire dual polarity palace. The violent tremors gradually calmed down at this moment, and the hearts of many disciples of the inner courtyard also relaxed. Everyone let out a soft sigh of relief. Finally, the wild energy on the surface of the ice and fire dual polarity palace has been sealed. Surprisingly, the inner court disciples didn't cheer and jump for joy, and they felt a heavy feeling instead. Ever since they saw Mu Chen Shui enter the ice and fire dual polarity palace for Zhuowen, everyone's heart was touched. Chapter 1380. Mu Chen Shui's insistence. Martial uncle, when do you plan to enter the ice and fire dual polarity palace? The moment the ice and fire dual polarity palace was sealed, old man Tiandu and Xiao Yu came to Yanji's side and asked in unison. Both of their personal disciples were trapped in the ice and fire dual polarity palace, so the two of them were extremely worried about the safety of Zhuowen and Mu Chen Shui. Yanji was taken aback, but he glanced at the ice and fire dual polarity palace and said in a deep voice, "At this moment, the ice and fire energy in the ice and fire dual polarity palace is too violent. I can't open the door and enter yet, otherwise the inner courtyard will definitely be destroyed." "Then when can you open it?" Xiao Yu asked anxiously. "A month later," Yanji said in a deep voice. Xiao Yu and old man Tiandu's faces darkened. A month was too long. If they opened it then, Mu Chen Shui and Zhuowen would probably be dead. "Can you open it earlier?" Old man Tiandu asked hopefully. Yanji shook his head and said, "The two of you don't know how violent the ice and fire dual polarity palace is right now, but I know very well that opening it earlier will only do more harm than good." Xiao Yu and old man Tiandu looked at each other and smiled dejectedly. "Let's wait. Perhaps Zhuowen and Chen Shui will still be alive in a month. At that time, I will rescue them." Yanji sighed softly, but even Yanji himself didn't believe these words. Under such violent ice and fire energy, the chances of two juniors below the Saint Realm surviving were too small. Inside the ice and fire dual polarity palace, the terrifying ice and fire energy raged like a monstrous tsunami. The air was filled with two different feelings of heat and cold. When these two kinds of energy mixed together, the explosive energy produced was extremely terrifying. In this terrifying energy storm, a beautiful figure staggered forward. If one looked carefully, it was Mu Chen Shui who had entered the ice and fire dual polarity palace like a moth to a flame. The third floor. Mu Chen Shui's beautiful eyes flickered as she stared at the flight of stairs in front of her. Step by step, the red lotus that was originally floating beneath her feet had already vanished. At this moment, Mu Chen Shui's bare feet stepped on the scalding hot ground as she advanced towards the third level step by step. The blazing high temperature roasted her bare feet, emitting a somewhat ear-piercing sizzling sound as a burnt smell wafted out like black smoke. Mu Chen Shui gripped the Xianming orb tightly in her right hand. Strands of Xianming laws exuded an icy aura, helping Mu Chen Shui resist the terrifying ice and fire energy around her. However, the law of Xianming within the Xianming orb was extremely limited. At this moment, the law of Xianming emanating from the surface of the Xianming orb was almost transparent. It would not last for long. The fourth floor. Stepping on the stairs to the third floor, Mu Chen Shui slowly entered the fourth floor. The ice and fire energy on the fourth floor was even more violent. Under the terrifying ice and fire energy, Mu Qinshua's petite body was like a small boat that could capsize at any time. However, she was extremely stubborn. Even though her feet were covered in scars from the scorching heat of the ground, she still gritted her teeth and advanced step by step without stopping. The fifth floor, the sixth floor, the seventh floor. Every time she ascended a floor, Mu Qinshui would mutter the same phrase to herself. It was as if these words were encouraging her, making her more determined to continue. It was also letting her know that she was one floor closer to the 18th floor. The 7th floor was a long bridge of white snow. Below the long bridge was an endless sea of magma. Back then, Zhuowen had some enlightenment on this floor, which allowed him to combine the 9 flames karmic fire and the dark frost poison to create the ice and fire palace. Huff huff. When she arrived before the arc at the end of the long bridge, Mu Qinshua's delicate face was covered in many fine beads of sweat. She was sweating profusely, and even her breathing had begun to become hurried. However, Mu Qinshui smiled and softly muttered, "It's almost the 8th floor. Only 10 floors away from the 18th floor. The 10th floor is not far, not far." With that, Mu Qinshui took a step forward and entered the 8th floor. Plop! The instant Mu Qinshui stepped onto the 8th floor, an even more terrifying ice and fire energy crushed her body like a towering mountain, causing her to kneel on the ground. The power of the law of mysterious underworld surrounding her had already become faintly discernible. Puchi! A mouthful of cherry-red blood was spat out from Mu Qinshui's mouth. As for her knees, due to the force of her kneeling, they were smashed into the ground. Her knees were scraped open and blood gathered on her legs like a small puddle. Only the 8th floor, only the 8th floor. Mu Qinshui muttered as though she was sleep-talking. She slowly stood up and continued to walk forward. The 8th floor was a mountain range of ice and fire. Mu Qinshui started climbing from the foot of the mountain. Her speed was slow but firm. Her pair of white, jade-like feet were covered in blood as she climbed. It was a ghastly sight. "Wait for me." Mu Qinshui pursed her lips. Even though her feet were covered in blood, she continued to climb step by step. Even though there were more wounds on her feet, she still did not give up. She was very stubborn. Crack! When Mu Qinshui climbed halfway up the mountain, the sound of glass shattering could be heard. Then, the law of mysterious underworld surrounding her shattered like glass. Boom! 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 The terrifying ice and fire energy wreaked havoc like a violent storm. It engulfed Mu Qinshui and tried to tear her into pieces. Mu Qinshui's face changed drastically. She raised her hand, and a surge of energy surged out from her body, resisting the ice and fire energy that was squeezing her from the surroundings. However, her condition was too poor. Her delicate body trembled slightly, and she was afraid that she would not be able to hold on for long. Mu Qinshui's eyes dimmed, and there was even a tinge of despair. She knew that she had reached her limit and could not move forward. Is it over? Mu Qinshui's eyes gradually blurred. Her gaze fell on the ice and fire energies that were constantly gathering around her, but her heart was exceptionally calm. However, she felt that it was a pity that she couldn't see Zhuo one last time before she died. Thinking of this, Mu Qinshui revealed a bitter smile. Soon after, she realized that her eyelids were getting heavier and heavier, and her vision was becoming blurry. Rumble! Suddenly, the entire ice and fire mountain range trembled violently. Then a huge ice and fire dragon rushed out from the depths of the mountain range. A slender figure stood on the ice and fire dragon. Mu Qinshui slowly fell towards the back of the mountain range. Her delicate body seemed to be boneless as she fell down the mountain range. Her eyes fell on the slender figure on the ice and fire dragon, and a smile appeared on her face. That figure was not unfamiliar to her. It was the figure that she wanted to enter the ice and fire dual pole palace to find. It was her man Zhuowen. Perhaps it's a hallucination before I die. However, to be able to see you one last time before I die, even if it's a hallucination, I'm already satisfied. The smile on Mu Qinshui's face grew wider and wider. Her eyelids grew heavier and heavier. She stretched out her right hand and tried to grab the figure standing on the ice and fire dragon. However, She realized that she had grabbed nothing but air. My eyelids are so heavy, Mu Chinxue muttered softly. Her eyelids grew heavier and heavier, as if she would close them at any moment. Aowu! A loud dragon's roar rang out as the ice and fire dragon leapt up. Zhuowen, who was standing on the dragon's head, suddenly looked down. His pupils shrank as he discovered that a beautiful figure had just fallen from the middle of the ice and fire mountain range. Chen Shui. Zhuowen gave a loud roar as his face revealed a look of shock and anger. He jumped off the ice and fire dragon and disappeared into the void. When he reappeared, he was already beside Mu Chinxue, and he caught her falling body in his embrace. At this moment, Zhuowen's face was very ugly. When he was on the 18th floor, he had sensed that someone had entered the 8th floor of the Ice and Fire Dual Pole Palace, because the 8th floor had a transportation channel that the symbol spirit had set up. If someone had entered the 8th floor, Zhuowen, who was on the 18th floor, would naturally have sensed it. From Zhuowen's point of view, most of the disciples should have left by now, yet there was still someone on the 8th level. Therefore, he decided to give it a try and used the teleportation channel to arrive at the 8th level. Soon after he saw this scene, Chen Shui. Zhuowen held Mu Chinxue as his eyes were filled with doubt and worry. He never thought that Mu Chinxue would not have left the Ice and Fire Dual Pole Palace yet. Especially when he saw the scars on Mu Chinxue's bare feet. His heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. Zhuowen, what I saw was not an illusion. You actually appeared in front of me? Mu Chinxue reached out her jade-like hand and stroked Zhuowen's face as she spoke with a sweet smile. Take this snow lotus jade pill first. Zhuowen took out a pill from his spirit ring and fed it to Mu Chinxue. The latter did not reject it as she opened her cherry lips and swallowed the pill. After a while, Mu Chinxue's pale face began to turn red, just like a ripe red apple. Chen Shui, why didn't you come out of the Ice and Fire Dual Pole Palace? Zhuowen slightly knit his brows as he spoke in a reproachful voice. Mu Chinxue quietly looked at Zhuowen as her pure white arms tightly held onto Zhuowen. She said in a soft voice, I left 3 months ago, but you didn't come out, so I came in to look for you. Mu Chinxue's words were very simple, and her tone was very calm. But Zhuowen's heart was moved as he felt a warm feeling in his heart. He was well aware of just how berserk the ice and fire energies in the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Palace were. For Mu Chinxue to enter the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Palace at such a time was undoubtedly an extremely unwise decision. But Mu Chinxue had done this and had entered the Ice and Fire Dual Pole Palace without any hesitation. All of this was for Zhuowen. Chen Shui. Zhuowen tightly hugged the girl in his embrace, but he found that he was at a loss for words. His heart was filled with emotions. Zhuowen suddenly realized that meeting a girl like Mu Chinxue was a great fortune for him. He would never let this girl down in his life. Don't say anything, just hold me tight. Mu Chinxue softly muttered. Just like a little kitten, she tightly leaned against Zhuowen's chest. I won't say anything else. I'll bring you to the 18th floor. Chapter 1381. Tenderness above the ice and fire dragon, wild winds blew. Mu Chinxue silently looked at the young man hugging her, looking at his chiseled face. As the wild winds blew, his hair danced in the wind, giving him a different kind of elegance. Furthermore, Mu Chinxue discovered that the berserk ice and fire energy of the Ice and Fire Dual Extremes Palace did not pose any threat to Zhuowen. In fact, in Zhuowen's embrace, the surrounding ice and fire energy that had been trying to corrode her seemed to be afraid of something and began to disperse. After a while, Zhuowen carried Mu Chinxue to the 18th floor. The ice and fire energy of the 18th floor was much more terrifying than the 8th floor. They were as dense as blades, making Mu Chinxue's scalp turn numb. The giant dragon descended and Zhuowen walked down the dragon's head. The surrounding terrifying ice and fire energy all avoided him, as if they were welcoming their king. In the center of the 18th floor, there was a giant cage. Inside the cage, there was a strange talisman floating there. The talisman was releasing the power of ice and fire. Ice Flame Sacred Talisman? Mu Chinxue was stunned, but she immediately guessed the name of the talisman floating in the center of the cage. After all, The Ice and Fire Dual Extremes Palace was the sacred weapon that suppressed the Ice Flame Sacred Talisman. Other than the Ice Flame Sacred Talisman hidden in the depths of the Ice and Fire Dual Extremes Palace, Mu Qinxue could not think of anything else. Zhuowen placed Mu Qinxue on the ground and said with a sigh, "Qinxue, why are you doing this? There's no need to throw away your life for me, it's not worth it." Mu Qinxue slightly shook her head and seriously said, "I feel it's worth it. Even if I have to throw away my life, it's worth it." Seeing Mu Qinshue's serious and stubborn expression, Zhuowen's eyes sparkled, and his heart filled with warmth. Then he seriously said, "The Ice and Fire Dual Extremes Palace has already been sealed, so I can't bring you out. However, when the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Palace opens again, you will have to leave. You cannot throw a tantrum." Mu Qinshue's beautiful eyes were startled, and she subconsciously asked, "What about you? What are you going to do?" Zhuowen smiled and said, "Look at me now. Do I look like someone who's in trouble? Actually, I have my own reasons for not leaving the Ice and Fire Dual Extreme Palace." "Is it because of the Ice Flame Saint Rune?" Mu Qinshue's beautiful eyes flickered as she asked softly. "Yes, the reason I entered the Holy God Academy, other than you, was also because of the Holy Ice Fire symbol. The reason why I wasn't corroded by the Ice and Fire energy was because I had refined the symbol spirit of the Holy Ice Fire symbol." Zhuowen smiled. Previously, Zhuowen had used the 9 Flames Karmic Fire and the Dark Frost Poison to create the Ice and Fire Palace, which was extremely effective against the symbol spirit. Zhuowen had also listened to Xiao Hei's suggestion and didn't let the symbol spirit go. Instead, he had completely refined and absorbed it. It was precisely because he had absorbed the symbol spirit that the Ice and Fire energy in the Ice and Fire Dual Extreme Palace didn't dare to attack Zhuowen. Moreover, it was also because Zhuowen had absorbed the symbol spirit that the Ice and Fire energy in the Ice and Fire Dual Extreme Palace had suddenly become violent. Mu Qinshuo pursed her cherry lips and gently nodded. "I understand. However, the Ice Flame Saint Rune is an extremely powerful treasure. If you don't have much confidence, you'd better not act rashly. Otherwise, the consequences will be unimaginable. Don't worry, I will act according to my abilities. During the time the Ice and Fire Dual Extreme Palace opens, I will slowly help you recuperate from your injuries." Zhuowen smiled as he squatted down and held Mu Qinshue's delicate feet with his right hand. However, Mu Qinshue's feet were now dripping with blood, which was a ghastly sight to behold. Mu Qinshuo cried out in alarm and tried to withdraw her feet. Her cheeks were slightly red as she said, "Don't look, it's too ugly. There's blood everywhere." However, Zhuowen shook his head. He tore off the front of his white robe and firmly held Mu Qinshue's feet with his right hand. Soon after, he carefully wiped off the blood on her feet. "Don't worry, as long as it's yours, it's the most beautiful in my eyes." Zhuowen revealed a trace of a gentle smile. When he finished wiping away all the blood on Mu Qinshue's feet, his expression became somewhat ugly. This was because he discovered that Mu Qinshue's feet were now covered in rather dense scars. At this moment, cherry red blood was still flowing nonstop, which was extremely glaring to the eye. Although with Mu Qinshue's cultivation, ordinary external injuries could be easily healed, these scars were not ordinary injuries. They were terrifying injuries caused by the Ice and Fire energy of the Ice and Fire Dual Extreme Palace. Even if it was an expert of the Emperor realm, it would not be so easy to recover from injuries caused by the Ice and Fire energy of the Ice and Fire Sacred Talisman. "Don't look." Mu Qinshuo also saw Zhuowen's expression. Her eyes were shrouded in mist, and her voice contained a trace of pleading. She did not want to show her worst side to Zhuowen. Every girl would want to present their best side to their lover when they were in front of him. A girl would doll herself up for her lover. "It's all right. I will heal all these scars for you." Zhuowen stretched out his right hand and gently stroked the scars on Mu Qinshue's feet. Waves of immortal energy swept out from his palm, and a milky white light gently enveloped Mu Qinshue's feet. Mu Qinshuo crossed her arms in front of her chest and leaned on her knees, quietly watching Zhuowen focus on healing her scars. This state lasted for 4 hours. Zhuowen sighed softly fine sweat trickling down his forehead. He smiled and said, "Finally, all the scars are healed." Lifting his head slightly, Zhuowen happened to see Mu Qinxue staring straight at him. When he looked up, their eyes just happened to meet. Touching his nose, Zhuowen said somewhat jokingly, "Are you looking at me like that because I'm too handsome?" Mu Qinxue did not evade. The corners of her mouth curled into a seductive arc. She curled her lips and said, "It's because there's something dirty on your face. That's why I'm looking at you." "Ah, there's something dirty? Where is it?" Zhuowen was startled. He touched his face awkwardly, as if looking for the dirty thing that Mu Qinxue was talking about. "Hee, I'll help you find it. The dirty thing is here." Mu Qinxue giggled. Suddenly, she approached Zhuowen, bent down, and kissed Zhuowen's lips, causing the latter to freeze on the spot. Their lips parted. Mu Qinxue looked at Zhuowen with a smile and said, "I've already taken out the dirty thing. It's here." Mu Qinxue pouted as she spoke. She lifted her jade-like hand and pointed at her cherry-red lips. Her eyes revealed a crafty expression. "You're so cunning. You actually snatched away my things without my permission. No, I must snatch it back." Zhuowen pretended to be angry. He suddenly stepped forward, hugged Mu Qinxue, and fiercely kissed her lips. Time slowly flowed by. A month's time passed in an instant. On this day, countless disciples from the 9 peaks of the inner academy raised their heads to look at the sky. The direction they were looking at was the empty space where the Ice and Fire Duel Hall was located. At this moment, Yanji Jiangxian, Wenbai and the 9 peak masters were quietly floating in front of the Ice and Fire Duel Hall. A month has passed. I will personally enter the Ice and Fire Duel Hall to take a look. Perhaps we might be able to find Zhuowen and Mu Qinxue. Yanji spoke in a deep voice. "Martial uncle, why do you need to mobilize so many people? Zhuowen and Mu Qinxue can't possibly be alive. You're just wasting your energy," Xianzhong said in a neutral tone. Xiao Yu and Old Man Tian-du glared at the same time and said in unison, "Xianzhong, shut up." Xianzhong was taken aback. Looking at Xiao Yu and Old Man Tian-du, who had such a tacit understanding, he revealed an embarrassed expression and no longer spoke. If it was only Xiao Yu, Xianzhong would have retorted and mocked him. However, since Old Man Tian-du was also criticizing him, it was indeed difficult for him to retort. "You two don't need to quarrel. I originally planned to enter the Ice and Fire Duel Hall. After all, the level of energy in the Ice and Fire Duel Hall this time is far more violent than before. It's really strange. I'm afraid that there's something wrong with the Ice and Fire Saint Rune." Yanji waved his sleeve and immediately signaled Jiang Xian and Wenbai with his eyes. Then, the 3 of them stood in 3 different directions of the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Palace. Each of them formed a seal, and Saint energy surged from 3 directions. Creak. Suddenly, the sealing power around the Ice and Fire Duel Hall gradually dissipated, and the gate of the hall slowly opened to both sides. Waves of ice and fire energy spread out, but at this moment, the energy emitted from the Ice and Fire Duel Hall was not as violent and terrifying as before. "I'll go in first. You guys wait outside," Yanji said and stepped into the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Palace. All the disciples of the 9 peaks were paying close attention to Yanji's actions. Many of them were hoping that Yanji would be able to find Zhuowen and Mu Qinxue. A month ago, Mu Qinshue's actions had touched too many people. No one wanted Mu Qinxue and Zhuowen to become a pair of miserable lovebirds because of this. "I hope that martial uncle Yanji can find Zhuowen and sister Qinxue. I hope that both of them are still alive." On Taishan Peak, Moyan Wushang put his hands together and prayed silently. Not only Moyan Wushang, but also Jianan Gatha, Emo Lingtian, Qingyin Luqing and other disciples who had a good relationship with Zhuowen. At this moment, all of them were praying that Zhuowen and Mu Qinxue could return safely. On the 18th floor of the Ice and Fire Duel Hall, Zhuowen slowly opened his eyes and muttered in a low voice, "The Ice and Fire Duel Hall has reopened. So fast." As he said this, Zhuowen looked at Mu Qinxue beside him and said, "Qinxue, I'll send you out first. I'm afraid I'll need some time." Mu Qinxue slightly nodded and said, "Zhuowen, be careful. The ice and fire sacred symbol isn't that easy to subdue. If you can't do it, come out as soon as possible. I know. I'll send you out first. Also, I hope that you won't mention anything about me after you leave. Otherwise, it will cause unnecessary trouble. Zhuowen suddenly said in a serious tone. Mu Qinxue sweetly smiled and said, Don't worry, I won't mention anything about you. Zhuowen nodded and immediately waved his right hand. The surrounding ice and fire energy condensed into a giant ice and fire dragon. The giant dragon bent down and lifted Mu Qinxue up. It let out a loud dragon roar and followed the passage to the 8th floor. It broke through the air and disappeared from the 18th floor. Chapter 1382. Re-enter. Yen Ji took a step onto the stairs leading to the 8th floor. Just as he was about to head to the 9th floor, an earth-shaking dragon roar filled the air. What is going on? Yen Ji's footsteps froze as he looked around in a somewhat stunned manner. Following which, a giant ice and fire dragon leapt out from the bottom of the 8th floor. There was a slender and elegant figure standing on the giant ice and fire dragon's body. Chen Shui. Yen Ji's sharp eyes fell onto the figure on the giant dragon's body. He could not help but cry out in surprise. He never imagined that after staying in the ice and fire dual pole palace for a month, Mu Qinxue would be completely fine. Mu Qinxue leapt off the giant ice and fire dragon's body and landed beside Yen Ji. She respectfully said, Greetings to Senior Uncle Master Yen Ji. Chen Shui, how did you do it? You're actually completely fine after staying in the ice and fire dual pole palace for a month? Yen Ji sized up Mu Qinxue and discovered that the latter was completely fine, without any injuries at all. He could not help but exclaim in surprise. Mu Qinshue's eyes sparkled as she said in a confused voice, Actually, I'm not sure either. I fainted after entering the 8th floor, and when I woke up, I was already on the giant ice and fire dragon's body. As for what happened, I don't know either. Ice and fire dragon? Yen Ji was stunned. His eyes fell onto the giant ice and fire dragon's body. However, the giant ice and fire dragon gave a roar before its body collapsed, turning into strands of ice and fire energy. After pondering for a while, Yen Ji realized that he could not figure it out, and did not pursue the matter any further. Instead, he said to Mu Qinxue, Little girl Chen Shui, I'll send you out of the ice and fire dual pole palace first. I still need to investigate this place. After saying this, Yen Ji flipped his right hand and saint energy wrapped around Mu Qinxue. Soon after, Mu Qinxue was sent out. Let's head to the 18th level to take a look. That brat Zhuowen had previously reached the 18th level. Moreover, the reason why the Ice and Fire Duel Extreme Hall has gone berserk is definitely related to the 18th level. After sending off Mu Qinxue, Yen Ji's footsteps did not stop. He directly passed through the 8th floor and flew towards the depths of the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Palace. A light pillar surfaced outside of the Ice and Fire Duel Extreme Hall. Mu Qinshue's graceful figure appeared in front of everyone. Girl Chen Shui, it's great that you're not dead. Mu Qinshue's appearance caused many people in the inner courtyard to fall silent. Soon after, it caused waves of uproar and commotion. Old man Tiandu even came to Mu Qinshue's side with tears streaming down his face. He held Mu Qinshue's shoulders with an emotional expression. Elder sister Chen Shui, sister-in-law. Moyan Wushang, Canaan, Gatha, Qingyin, and Emo Lingtian rushed over from their respective peaks. They looked excitedly at the unharmed Mu Qinxue. I'm fine. Thank you for everyone's concern. Mu Qinxue patted Moyan Wushang's shoulder. Looking at Gatha and the others behind him, her eyes were filled with a gentle smile. Girl Chen Shui, have you seen that brat Zhuowen? That guy shouldn't be dead, right? Xiao Yu immediately walked in front of Mu Qinxue and asked with an emotional expression. Mu Qinshue's beautiful eyes flickered, but she shook her head and said, I didn't see Zhuowen inside because I only reached the 8th floor. The 18th floor is too far, and I can't reach it with my strength. When these words were said, Xiao Yu's eyes revealed a look of disappointment. However, thinking about what Mu Qinxue said, it was right. At that time, the energy of the Ice and Fire Duel Extreme Hall was too wild. With Mu Qinshue's strength, it was almost impossible for her to enter the 18th floor. Then whether Zhuowen is alive or dead is still unknown. Moyan Wuxiang said with a frown. Relax, big brother, Zhuowen is very lucky. Isn't Martial Uncle Yanji going to enter the 18th floor of the Ice and Fire Duel Extreme Hall? At that time, we'll be able to find big brother Zhuowen inside. Kanan said with a heartless smile. On the 17th step, Yanji quietly came to the end of the stairs and stared at the ice and fire energy above with a serious expression. The entrance to the 18th floor has been sealed. What is going on? Who did it? Yanji frowned and snorted coldly. He suddenly punched out and heavily smashed the entrance to the 18th floor. Rumble! The sound of the sky collapsing and the earth cracking resounded. Then the entire 17th floor trembled. However, Yanji was forced to retreat dozens of steps. The ice and fire energy that sealed the entrance to the 18th floor did not move at all. Why is it so hard? This is the power of the ice-fire holy symbol. Yanji's pupils shrank as he exclaimed in disbelief. His full-strength attack was actually unable to shake this ice and fire energy. The only thing that could do this was the power of the ice-fire Saint Rune. However, what made him puzzled was what had happened on the 18th floor. The ice-fire holy symbol had actually activated its power to seal the entrance to the 18th floor. Let me try again. As Yanji spoke, he took another step forward. Then, like a storm of attacks, he continuously bombarded the ice and fire energy that sealed the entrance to the 18th floor. Soon after, an extremely terrifying trembling sound was heard. On the 18th floor, Zhuowen stood in front of the entrance with a slightly pale face. Because he had refined the symbol spirit, he was able to use a little of the ice-fire holy symbol's power to maintain the entrance to the 18th floor. However, Zhuowen was an expert of the heavenly saint level after all, and the power of his attacks was not weak. He could only use a little of the ice-fire holy symbol's power. Right now, a portion of Yanji's attacks was being withstood by him. Finally, Yanji's attacks stopped. Soon after, his brows tightly knitted together. How strange, muttering in a low voice. Yanji gave up on attacking and turned around to leave the 17th floor. He knew that since so many attacks were unable to break open the ice and fire energy at the entrance to the 18th floor, there was no point in staying any longer. I finally left. At the entrance to the 18th floor, Zhuowen let out a sigh of relief. Soon after, he came in front of the cage that held the ice-fire holy symbol and muttered in a low voice. Xiaohei, after refining the symbol spirit, can I really completely control the ice-fire holy symbol? Of course you can. Originally, you had a certain compatibility with the ice-fire holy symbol, because you carried a trace of the ice-fire holy symbol's origin. In addition, you refined the symbol spirit, so you are inextricably linked to the ice-fire holy symbol. However, if you want to completely control the ice-fire holy symbol, I'm afraid it will take a long time. As for how long, I can't guarantee. Xiaohei appeared on Zhuowen's shoulder and said indifferently, this is an excellent opportunity to refine the ice-fire holy symbol. I won't let go of this opportunity. No matter how long it takes, I will completely control it. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with determination. Soon after, he sat cross-legged in front of the cage. 9 flames karmic fire and dark frost poison appeared in his hands, and combined them to form the Ice-Fire Palace. At this moment, the Ice-Fire Palace had a trace of spirituality. After all, the Ice-Fire Palace had completely refined the symbol spirit of the Ice-Fire holy symbol and integrated it into itself. To put it bluntly, the power of the Ice-Fire Palace was probably several times stronger than before. Zhuowen was communicating with the Ice-Fire holy symbol through this spirituality. From there, he could slowly control the power of the Ice-Fire holy symbol and finally completely control it. However, this required patience and time. Outside the Ice and Fire Duel Extreme Palace, Yanji's imposing figure slowly appeared, completely attracting the attention of countless people. However, when everyone saw Yanji come out alone, their eyes were filled with astonishment. Originally, everyone was puzzled that Yanji would bring Zhuowen out, but they did not expect the result to be like this. Martial Uncle Yanji, where is Zhuowen? Xiaoyu came in front of Yanji and asked with an ugly expression. He already had a bad premonition, but he still asked this question. Yanji glanced at Xiao Yu and said rather helplessly, "Sorry, I can't enter the 18th floor. There's a strand of ice and fire energy at the entrance. It's extremely terrifying. Even I can't blast it open. Even Martial Uncle Yanji can't blast it open. What happened on the 18th floor?" Yanji's words immediately caused an uproar in the surroundings. Yanji was a heavenly saint, but the energy on the 18th floor was actually so terrifying that even Yanji could not blast it open. That Zhuowen is just too unlucky. He's actually trapped on the 18th floor just like that. He's probably done for. After recovering from their shock, many people showed pity. He had clearly obtained first place in the battle between the Ice and Fire Dual Extreme Palace. But he had ended up like this in the end. It was quite lamentable. How is this possible? Big brother Zhuowen won't die. Jianan couldn't help but shout out. Even Gatha, Mo Lingtian, Qing Yin and Moyan Wushang fell silent. Although they didn't want to believe it, Yanji wouldn't lie to them. After all, the former was a heavenly saint expert, and the dean of the inner yard. How could such an expert deceive them? Yanji shook his head. With a wave of his sleeve, he closed the Ice and Fire Dual Extreme Palace. In fact, he also felt that it was a pity. After all, Zhuowen was the second genius after Yuanji, who could comprehend the void immortal scripture. After doing this, Yanji left with Jiang Xian, and the two elders went by. After Yanji left, the 9 peak masters naturally wouldn't stay. They returned to their respective peaks. Of course, their faces were filled with sorrow. Mu Qinshua's beautiful eyes were calm. She followed old man Tiandu, and returned to Tiandu Peak. Only she knew that Zhuowen hadn't met with any mishap. He was silently refining the ice and fire sacred symbol. Perhaps when Zhuowen came out, it would be the time for him to amaze the world. However, Mu Qinshu wasn't sure when he would come out. Xiao Yu's face became extremely ugly, even a little gloomy. He stared deeply at the Ice and Fire Dual Extreme Palace inside. He then left the Ice and Fire Dual Extreme Palace and returned to Mysterious Origin Peak. However, at this moment, Xiao Yu looked as if he had aged a dozen years. He was listless. Mysterious Origin Peak finally had a genius like Zhuowen. However, he had fallen in such a way. Xiao Yu simply couldn't accept this fact. "Master," Lu Qing called out softly from Mysterious Origin Peak. Chapter 1383. In a miserable state, time flew by like a wild horse that had escaped its reins. It galloped past like a trickle of water that was completely silent. On this day, a beautiful figure slowly arrived at the side of the cliff, at the top of Capital Sky Peak. She lifted her head slightly, and quietly observed the Ice and Fire Dual Pole Hall in the middle of the 9 peaks. At this moment, the Ice and Fire Dual Pole Hall appeared to be extremely peaceful. The ice and fire energy on its surface slowly flowed like a stream. It quietly flowed, and was no longer as wild and violent as before. 2 years have passed. Senior sister Chen Shui would come to this cliff every day and quietly stand there, watching the Ice and Fire Dual Pole Hall. Senior sister Chen Shui must be doing this because of that Zhuowen. After all, that Zhuowen has never come out ever since he obtained the first place in the Ice and Fire Dual Pole Hall. Now that 2 years have passed, I'm afraid he is definitely doomed. It is said that Zhuowen has reached the 18th level. Back then, Martial Granduncle Zhuowen wanted to enter the 18th level, but he was blocked by the ice and fire energy at the entrance. Even Martial Granduncle Yanji's group found it difficult to enter the 18th level. Something ominous must have happened on the 18th level. Moreover, Zhuowen is on the 18th level. Behind the cliff was the enormous square of Capital Sky Peak. At this moment, many Capital Sky Peak disciples were quietly watching Mu Qinshua's beautiful figure, as pity filled their hearts. For the past 2 years, Mu Qinshu would stand on the cliff every day, absent-mindedly watching the Ice and Fire Dual Pole Hall. It was as if she was waiting for someone. This person was known by the entire Inner Academy. He was Zhuowen. While everyone believed that Zhuowen had died in the Ice and Fire Dual Pole Hall, Mu Qinshu did not believe it. She continued to wait day after day. This action had become a unique sight for Capital Sky Peak over the past 2 years. Many disciples shook their heads and sighed emotionally. Not far from the cliff there was a bumpy rock. A young man with a sword on his back silently leaned against the rock. His long hair draped over his shoulders, and his eyes were filled with ruthlessness. It was as if nothing in the world mattered to him. However, when this young man's gaze landed on Mu Qinshua's back on the cliff, the ruthlessness in his eyes melted bit by bit like a melting glacier. It's senior brother Jianmu. He's here too. Some of the sharp-eyed disciples in the square immediately saw the young man leaning against the rock. All of them began to whisper softly. Jianmu's eyes flickered. In the end, he lifted his foot and climbed up the cliff. He arrived behind Mu Qinshu and hesitated to speak. Mu Qinshu slowly turned around, her beautiful eyes staring at Jianmu as she calmly asked, "Senior brother Jianmu, what's the matter?" Jianmu was stunned. Soon after, he revealed a strange smile and said, "Master asked me to inform you that the 9 Nether meet will begin in 2 years. He plans to gather us 4 direct disciples at the Zhaixing Pavilion." "What's the matter?" Mu Qinshu asked. "Master plans to activate the Zhaixing Grand Array. He hopes that in these 2 years, the 4 of us can raise our cultivation by another level. This way, after the 9 Nether meet, we can win face for our inner court in Sky Capital Peak," Jianmu said. Mu Qinshu nodded and said, "I understand. I'll go to the Zhaixing Pavilion later. I plan to stay here for a while." Hearing this, Jianmu's eyes dimmed. He said in a low voice, "Junior sister Qinshu, it's already been 2 years. Although I don't want to speak nonsense, the truth is that Zhuowen might have already fallen." Mu Qinshu's face was extremely calm. She was not moved by Jianmu's words. "I believe that Zhuowen won't die. Not to mention 2 years, even 10 or 20 years. I'll wait until he comes out," Mu Qinshu said in a serious manner. Hearing this, Jianmu's eyes dimmed even more. He actually felt a pain in his heart. A pain that felt like a knife was stirring in his heart. "Since that's the case, I won't disturb you any longer. Remember to gather at the Zhaixing Pavilion when the time comes." Jianmu revealed a smile. Soon after, he turned around and left the cliff. However, the instant he turned around, his eyes regained their emotionlessness, and even became somewhat cold. It was as if he had cut off the last trace of emotion in his heart. Mu Qinshu sighed softly as she watched Jianmu's departing figure. How could she not know Jianmu's feelings for her? However, she already had Zhuowen in her heart, so how could she possibly have room for anyone else? There was a dense forest several hundred miles away from the entrance of the inner courtyard. To the east of the forest was the middle and lower reaches of the Divine River. The torrential river flowed towards the end of the Divine River like a swimming dragon. Above the Divine River, a figure was fleeing in an extremely sorry state. Cherry red blood dripped down from the sky like raindrops, dyeing the clear Divine River a strange blood red. The figure's hair was disheveled, and his clothes were disheveled. There were several hundred wounds all over his body. Cherry red blood flowed from these wounds. 100 meters behind this figure, 2 other figures were following closely behind. The 2 of them were dressed in golden armor. One of them carried a golden double-edged axe on his back, while the other held a golden spear. The 2 of them were extremely tall, at least 3 meters tall. They looked like small mountains. Both of their auras were very powerful like vast mountains. They were both high-level great emperors. "Lu Hantian, you won't be able to escape. How dare you molest the young miss of our Martial Saint Tower? You simply don't know how to write the word death." The man with the double-edged axe on his back shouted in a hoarse voice at the fleeing man in front of him. Lu Hantian's eyes grew colder. He said coldly, "Your Martial Saint Tower is despicable and shameless. I, Lu Hantian, joined your Martial Saint Tower, and this is how you treat me? You dare to slander me because of this? Your Martial Saint Tower is a disgrace to one of the 5 great factions of the Divine Spectre realm. Slander you? You really think too highly of yourself. Why would our Martial Saint Tower need to slander a nobody like you? You were the despicable one who wanted to take advantage of our Martial Saint Tower's first Mississippi. In the end, our first senior brother saw through your trick. If it weren't for first senior brother, I'm afraid a beast like you would have already succeeded. Our Martial Saint Tower shouldn't have lured a wolf like you in." The voice of the man with the double-edged axe on his back turned extremely cold. The despicable one is Lung Quan. The one who wanted to molest Ling Yen is Lung Quan. Don't you know how to distinguish between right and wrong? I'm just a disciple who just joined the Martial Saint Tower. How could I have such a high-grade pill like the insect corpse pill? Lu Hantian cursed. The man with the spear sneered. Who knows what kind of despicable method you used to get the insect corpse pill? I think you entered the Martial Saint Tower for our young miss. Now that the matter has been exposed, you dare to slander our first senior brother? What a despicable person. If I don't get rid of you today, how can I show off the might of our Martial Saint Tower? As he said that, the man with the spear took a step forward. His speed actually increased to the extreme. In an instant, he closed the distance between him and Lu Hantian. He swung the spear in his right hand. The surface of the golden spear was covered with a golden brilliance. Like a sharp arrow, it pierced through the void and blasted towards Lu Hantian's back. Lu Hantian's pupil shrank. With a shout, he summoned his soul armor, the blood sacrifice sealed gate. Whoosh whoosh. Above the void, a huge blood-red gate fell from the sky and blocked Lu Hantian's back. Ding! The sound of metal clashing resounded. The golden spear's radiance instantly arrived and blasted against the blood-red gate. The gate's forward momentum was immediately stopped. Lu Hantian let out a muffled groan as a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He was forced to retreat again and again. With the help of the recoil force, Lu Hantian quickly fled forward, creating a distance between the two people behind him. Boom! A thunderous sound resounded. The blood sacrifice sealed gate crumbled under the golden spear's radiance. The man with the golden spear followed closely behind. What a slippery fellow! The man with the golden spear only stopped for a moment at the place where the blood sacrifice sealed gate was destroyed. Then he chased after Lu Hantian again. Lu Hantian's current situation was not good. Although his cultivation had improved a lot in the past 3 years, his cultivation was only at the 6th level Emperor realm. The two people behind him were the elite disciples of the Martial Saint Tower. Their cultivation had reached the 7th level Emperor realm. Facing the pursuit of the two people, Lu Hantian was like throwing an egg against a rock. The three of them chased and fled. Their speed was very fast, and they soon approached the mountain gate of Fine God College. Lu Hantian took out his communication jade charm from his spiritual ring, and quickly sent a message to Zhuowen. He knew that if he did not ask Zhuowen for help now, he would be like a lamp without oil. However, Lu Hantian was disappointed that Zhuowen's communication jade charm did not respond at all. What's going on? Why is Zhuowen's communication jade charm not responding? Did something happen? Lu Hantian muttered to himself anxiously. I can only ask for help from Wushang and Jianan. Feeling the terrifying aura of the two people behind him, Lu Hantian's expression changed. He could only use his communication jade charm to inform Moyan Wushang and the others. On the lotus platform of Taixian Peak, Guqin music resounded around the platform. It was like the chirping of an oriole, crisp and pleasant to the ears. In the middle of the platform, there were 3 beautiful figures sitting cross-legged. In front of them, there was a wooden table. On the table, there was a guqin made of sandalwood. Ding! A beautiful figure's delicate body trembled as she accidentally broke the strings of her zither. The other 2 people also stopped their movements because of this break in the sound. Wushang! What's wrong? Yuan Wanha put down her slender hand and turned to look at Moyan Wushang behind her. Her beautiful eyes revealed a trace of doubt. Qingyin also turned her head slightly and looked at Moyan Wushang. Moyan Wushang flipped her hand, and a communication jade charm appeared in her palm. She said in a deep voice, "A friend sent me a distress signal. Someone is chasing after him." Your friend sent you a distress signal. In other words, your friend is near the inner courtyard. Yuan Wanha was startled and said with surprise, "Senior sister, I have to go out." Chapter 1384. Disciple of the Martial Saint Tower. Mist curled around the entrance of the inner court. 2 guards in white uniforms stood at the entrance made of white marble. Swoosh! The sound of something tearing through the air rang out, and attracted the attention of the 2 guards. Who are you? Stop right now. One of the guards shouted, as the veins on the back of his right hand that was holding onto the spear bulged. Swoosh! Lu Hantian suddenly stopped as his breathing became hurried. He anxiously said to the two guards, "Brothers, I'm Zhuowen's friend. I have an urgent matter to discuss with him. Can the two of you make an exception and let me in?" The two guards looked at each other when they heard this. Both of them had strange expressions on their faces. The two of them had naturally heard of the name Zhuowen. It could even be said that Zhuowen was extremely famous in the inner court. However, Zhuowen had not come out of the ice and fire dual polarity hall more than 2 years ago. Therefore, many people believed that Zhuowen had completely fallen. The fact that this person had come to look for Zhuowen naturally made the two guards feel rather strange. "You're looking for Zhuowen? However, it's a pity that Zhuowen is already dead. You can leave now." Just as the two guards were about to speak, a gloomy voice sounded from within the mountain gate. Subsequently, a black-robed young man with a gloomy expression walked over. "Senior brother Xianqi." The instant the young man appeared, the two guards hurriedly bowed. Their expressions were filled with reverence. Xianqi was the eldest direct disciple of the profound underworld peak. His status was not something that the two of them could compare to. Naturally, the two of them did not dare to slight him. "What did you say? Zhuowen is dead? How is that possible?" Lu Hantian's pupils shrank as he shouted with an agitated expression. Xianqi looked down at Lu Hantian from high above and said indifferently, "Scram. This place doesn't really welcome someone who isn't from the inner court." The two guards looked at each other. They wanted to say something but hesitated. In the end, they didn't dare to say anything. Although the man in front of them was Zhuowen's friend, they didn't know whether Zhuowen was dead or alive. They naturally didn't want to offend Xianqi because of this. Lu Hantian was both shocked and furious. He didn't expect Xianqi to speak so rudely. Furthermore, he was even more puzzled about Zhuowen's death. Did something happen to Zhuowen in the inner yard? "Lu Hantian, you actually dared to escape to Jiaoshan Institute. You really have guts." A loud shout came from behind Lu Hantian. Immediately after, two men dressed in golden armor stopped more than 10 meters behind Lu Hantian. Their gazes were filled with fear as they looked at the entrance of the inner courtyard. In the Divine Spectre domain, the inner yard was the strongest force. They had 3 saints, which far surpassed the other forces. They were fully deserving of being the overlord force of the Divine Spectre domain. Therefore, when the two men saw Lu Hantian coming to the entrance of the inner yard, their gazes were filled with fear. Could it be that this Lu Hantian knew someone from the inner yard? Someone from the Martial Saint Tower? Xianqi also noticed the two men in golden armor. His brows furrowed slightly as he asked in confusion, "So it's the senior direct disciple of the profound underworld peak. Lord Xianqi, we are indeed disciples of the Martial Saint Tower." The two men's attitudes were extremely respectful as they nodded and smiled. "Oh, you know me?" Xianqi asked in surprise. "Of course we know each other. The two of us are disciples of the inner tower, under senior brother Leng Quan." This humble one happened to see Lord Xianqi and senior brother Leng Quan chatting together. The man with the long spear smiled flatteringly. "I see." Xianqi nodded and said no more. For a moment, the atmosphere became heavy. The eyes of the man with the long spear flickered. He suddenly smiled and said, "Lord Xianqi, we're here today to capture this lecher. I wonder if Lord Xianqi can make an exception and let us capture this lecher? Of course, if this person is related to Lord Xianqi, we'll give you face and not pursue any consequences." The man with the long spear was rather smart. He didn't speak too confidently and gave Xianqi enough face. Xianqi was elated when he heard that. He glanced at Lu Hantian and said, "This person has nothing to do with our inner yard. You can do whatever you want, including killing him." Lu Hantian's face changed drastically when he heard that. Xianqi's words were sinister, especially the last part. He was clearly hinting at the two disciples of the Martial Saint Tower to kill Lu Hantian on the spot. "Thank you, Lord Xianqi." The two disciples of the Martial Saint Tower were overjoyed when they heard that. They didn't expect Xianqi to be so lenient and allow them to kill Lu Hantian. Of course, they didn't know that Xianqi only interfered because he heard Lu Hantian mention that he was Zhuowen's friend. After all, Qianqi was just about to go out at the mountain gate when he happened to bump into Lu Hantian. Originally, he wouldn't pay attention to this kind of thing, but when he heard about Jewel 1, he immediately paid attention to it. Lu Hantian, you won't be able to escape today. Do you think you're an inner yard disciple? How dare you come to the inner yard to wag your tail and beg for mercy? It's a pity that your wishful thinking is wrong. The man with the long spear licked his lips. His eyes emitted a chilling light. He took a step forward and arrived in front of Lu Hantian in an instant. He stretched out his right hand, and the long spear in his hand swept towards Lu Hantian's back. Lu Hantian shouted. The blood sacrifice sealed door appeared in front of him again. He immediately retreated, not daring to come into contact with the man with the long spear. Bang! An explosion resounded as the long spear collided with the blood sacrifice sealed door. Following that, a terrifying energy exploded, and the blood sacrifice sealed door collapsed completely. The man with the long spear continued to chase after Lu Hantian. Let's see where you can run to. When Lu Hantian retreated dozens of meters, a malevolent voice resounded in his ears. Following that, a gust of wind whizzed over and smashed towards Lu Hantian. Not good. Lu Hantian turned his head and saw the man with the double-edged axe on his back. He didn't know when, but he had already appeared behind him. He held the double-edged axe in his right hand and fiercely chopped towards Lu Hantian's waist. Dodge! Lu Hantian furiously roared. He forcefully twisted his waist in an attempt to dodge the axe. However, the distance between the two was too short. Furthermore, the double-edged axe was extremely fast. Although Lu Hantian had deliberately avoided his vitals, he was still struck by the double-edged axe. An extremely deep wound appeared on his waist. Pucci! Fresh blood flew out and dyed Lu Hantian's clothes red. It looked like a beautiful rose, and was extremely frightening. Lu Hantian, where are you looking? When Lu Hantian clutched his stomach and retreated once again, a cold laughter resounded. Shortly after, the man with the long spear instantly appeared before Lu Hantian. The long spear was like a poisonous snake as it pierced towards him. Pucci! The long spear directly pierced through Lu Hantian's left shoulder and lifted him up before heavily smashing him onto the ground. In an instant, countless dust flew up. Lu Hantian fell to the ground and coughed incessantly as he spat out a large mouthful of blood. Tap, tap, tap. The two disciples of the Martial Saint Tower slowly walked towards Lu Hantian. The man with the long spear said indifferently, "We won't kill you now. You took advantage of the eldest Mississippi. When we return, our eldest senior brother will properly punish you. Killing a scum like you right now would be letting you off too easily." As he spoke, the man with the long spear slammed his right palm onto Lu Hantian's back. Once again, he slammed Lu Hantian onto the ground. At the same time, a surge of energy surged out and turned into an invisible rope, binding Lu Hantian to the ground. Lord Qianqi, thank you for this. The man with the long spear said politely to Qianqi as he held Lu Hantian in his hand. It's nothing. It's nothing. Qianqi said indifferently. Then we'll take our leave first. The two men from the Martial Saint Tower bowed and nodded toward Qianqi soon after. They planned to leave this place. However, just as the two of them were about to take a step forward, a terrifying sound wave spread out, causing their bodies to stiffen. The sound wave contained traces of killing intent. It was as if they were in the middle of a battlefield, causing their hearts to tremble. Who's there? The eyes of the two Martial Saint Tower's disciples narrowed. They could not help but turn their gazes towards the mountain gate of the inner academy. A few figures were slowly walking over from there. The one leading them was a lady with a cold expression. This lady was hugging a zither and was continuously playing a desolate tune. Behind the lady were four people. The four of them were Kanan Gatha, Imo Lingtian and Qing Yin, who had followed Zhuowen from the outer courtyard. In the past 2 years, after the 5 of them had joined the 9 peaks, their strength had increased by leaps and bounds. Especially Gatha, her cultivation had reached the 6th level Emperor realm. However, her combat strength was comparable to that of an advanced Emperor realm expert. Although Kanan was only a 5th level Emperor realm expert, with the Undying Armor Soul, and the 9 divine demon transformations, he could unleash strength that far exceeded a middle-level Emperor Realm expert. It would be difficult for a 7th-level Emperor Realm expert to defeat him. Moyan Wuxiang, Qingyin, and Mo Lingtian had all reached the 6th level of the Emperor Realm. After all, the Fine Gods Academy was a powerful force in the 9 Netherworld realm. After joining their respective peaks, the 5 of them had received sufficient resources to cultivate. In 2 to 3 years, their cultivation had increased by 3 small realms. Naturally, it was not a problem. Cough. Wuxiang, Qingyin, Canaan, Gatha, and Ling Tian. Lu Hantian, who was being carried by the man with the long spear, opened his drowsy eyes. When he saw Moyan Wuxiang and the other 4, a glimmer of hope appeared in his eyes. It was as if he had found a life-saving straw. Senior Hantian. The 5 of them stared at Lu Hantian, and their expressions changed slightly. When Lu Hantian had followed Zhuowen into the 9 Netherworld realm, they had a good relationship with him and could chat with him. Later on, because Lu Hantian was not an inner courtyard disciple, he brought Lve Tao, Luo Xing, and Qing Lian out of the inner courtyard to look for opportunities in the divine specter realm. Chapter 1385. Shameless Xianqi squinted his eyes and looked at Moyan Wuxiang and the others. Zhuowen had a good relationship with Moyan Wuxiang and the others. He knew that if Lu Hantian was Zhuowen's friend, they wouldn't just sit by and watch. Xianqi's lips curled into a smile as he looked at Moyan Wuxiang and the others. The 2 disciples of the Martial Saint Tower looked fearful when they noticed that Moyan Wuxiang and the others recognized Lu Hantian. They didn't expect that Lu Hantian would be related to the people of the Divine Academy. They started to hesitate. You 2 are disciples of the Martial Saint Tower, right? You 2 have guts. Senior Hantian is our friend. How dare you injure him like this? Jianan took a step forward and glared at them. He pounced towards the man with the golden spear. The muscles on his body started to swell and emit a metallic luster. The man with the golden spear squinted his eyes and swung the spear in his right hand. The golden light was like the sun as it shot towards Jianan. First transformation of the divine demon. Jianan roared. The metallic luster on his body became even more dazzling as a terrifying power surged out from his body. Boom! Jianan's method of attack was simple and crude. He directly used his bare hands to smash onto the surface of the golden spear, causing numerous golden ripples to shoot out from it. Jianan's forward-charging momentum had been completely stopped by this spear. Lu Hantian has committed a heinous crime in the Martial Saint Tower. We are here under the orders of the Martial Saint to capture him. You're only a 5th-level emperor. You're no match for me. The man with the golden spear glanced at Jianan indifferently. Jianan was a disciple of the Divine Academy after all. He didn't dare to kill him. Get lost. Second transformation of the divine demon. Jianan said coldly. His body grew a few feet taller and looked sturdier as he pounced forward. The man with the golden spear frowned and snorted. He didn't say anything as he held the spear in his right hand. Boom! 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 The 2 of them instantly clashed. The spear-wielding man was a 7th-level martial emperor after all, so he was able to deal with Jianan with ease. Third transformation. Fourth transformation. Fifth transformation. Jianan was like a man who risked his life as he smashed out punch after punch. His fists tore through space, and the sound of cloth being torn apart was extremely ear-piercing. Especially after he executed the 5th transformation. Jianan's body had practically grown to 10 m tall. Even his clothes had been torn apart, revealing his robust muscles. After the 5th transformation, Canaan's strength had increased by a lot. He threw out a punch, and a ring of chi wave formed around his arm, spreading out in all directions. His fist instantly enlarged and smashed onto the golden spear. Thud, thud, thud. The spear-wielding man's expression changed slightly. Under this punch, he was forced back dozens of steps. His right hand that was holding the spear was trembling. This fellow, how did his strength suddenly become so terrifying? Especially this monstrous strength. The spear-wielding man's face turned pale, and his gaze became somewhat cautious. Put down Senior Hantian. While the spear-wielding man was still in shock, Jianan's voice rang out. Unknowingly, Jianan had appeared in front of the spear-wielding man, and his huge fist rapidly enlarged in the spear-wielding man's eyes. Bang! However, when Jianan's fist was about to land in front of the spear-wielding man's eyes, a figure stood in front of the spear-wielding man and grabbed Jianan's fist. Jianan's pupil shrank, and he raised his head slightly. He saw Xianqi, who had unknowingly stood in front of the spear-wielding man. Xianqi looked down at Jianan from above, and his right hand suddenly exerted strength. Instantly, the crisp sound of bones cracking rang out, and his palm smashed onto Jianan's chest. Boom! Jianan was like a catkin in the wind, and he fell downwards, smashing onto the ground and forming a huge pit. Dust filled the air. Jianan! Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Moyan Wuxiang and the others' faces changed drastically, and they all executed their movement techniques, descending towards the huge pit below. Mo Lingtian helped Jianan up from the pit, and his gaze was filled with worry. At this moment, Jianan's condition was not too good. His right hand was dislocated, and his face was pale without any blood. Brother, are you all right? Gatha asked worriedly. Jianan shook his head, and his left hand pinched his right hand, and he straightened it. The undying armor soul on his body started to work, and his dislocated right arm instantly recovered. After recovering, Jianan's gaze was fixed on Xianqi, and he coldly said, as expected of the Xianming Peak's first direct disciple, to be able to bully the weak so calmly. Hearing that, Xianqi's eyes narrowed, and he coldly said, to bully the weak, it's clearly you guys who are distorting the truth. This Lu Hantian took advantage of the first miss of the Martial Saint Tower, and you guys actually dare to protect such a shameless person. You guys are really embarrassing our academy. Bullshit, Senior Hantian is not that kind of person. The one who is the most like that should be you. Jianan coldly replied. Xianqi's face was slightly gloomy, and he said, you dare to insult me and offend your superior? Looks like as your senior brother, I will have to teach you a lesson. As he spoke, Xianqi spread his wings like a great rock, and he suddenly descended. His target was Jianan. Xianqi, you've gone too far. Moyan Wuxiang was both shocked and furious. He immediately took out his zither, and Qingyin, who was standing beside him, also took out her zither. Their slender hands plucked the zither strings, and the power of sound waves spread out. As for Mo Lingtian, he directly took out his armor soul, which was a huge black sword. He used the sky burial sword scripture, and immediately, the earth-shattering power spread out from the surface of the huge sword. Gatha also took out her Heaven's Wrath armor soul. Countless snowstorms spread out, and within the snowstorm, a majestic figure was faintly discernible. Jianan followed closely behind, and faced the attack with his bare hands. Xianqi's eyes were indifferent. His right hand formed into a claw, and he pressed down. A mountain-like pressure filled the entire space. Boom! 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 The attacks of the two collided, and an ear-piercing explosion erupted. Then the two figures froze in the air. Xianqi frowned, clearly not satisfied with the result. His right hand suddenly took out the huge weapon on his back, and he violently smashed it down, smashing it against the combined attack of Moyan Wuxiang and the other four. Boom! 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 A series of explosions rang out, and a gust of cold air swept out from the huge weapon, like a dragon swimming in the air. Then Moyan Wuxiang and the other four's faces changed drastically. They felt as if a huge mountain was pressing down on them, and they groaned as they retreated. The two of you take him away. I will help you block these guys. Xianqi said to the two disciples of the Martial Saint Tower behind him. The two disciples of the Martial Saint Tower looked at each other, and their eyes were filled with gratitude. The spear-wielding man smiled and said, Thank you, Senior Xianqi. If you have time in the future, you can come to the Martial Saint Tower as a guest. Our senior brother misses you very much. Of course, the two of you can go first. Xianqi said indifferently. He held the huge ruler in his right hand, and his eyes were filled with coldness as he stared at Moyan Wuxiang and the other four. Thank you. After the two disciples of the Martial Saint Tower finished speaking, they did not hesitate to pick up the half-dead Lu Hantian, and turned into two golden lights and disappeared in the air. Bastard! Jianan cursed in a low voice, and took a step forward, intending to chase after the two disciples of the martial saint tower. Boom! However, Jianan did not rush out for long. A terrifying cold aura swept over like a poisonous snake, and hit Jianan at a tricky angle. Thud! 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 Jianan was caught off guard, and under the cold aura, he was forced to retreat. He stared at Xianqi, and his eyes were filled with shock and anger. Xianqi, you son of a bitch. As a disciple of the Fine Gods Academy, you actually helped other factions. Do you have any sense of shame? Jianan was anxious, and could not help but curse. Xianqi's face was a little pale, and he said coldly, that Lu Hantian took advantage of a girl, and she's the miss of the martial saint tower. If we protect such a shameless person, what kind of place do you think our Fine Gods Academy is? After he finished speaking, Xianqi did not waste any more words. He held the huge ruler in his right hand, and cold aura lingered around his body. He suddenly dropped down like a meteor, and his speed was extremely fast. The air even emitted a rumbling sound. In the air, Xianqi raised the huge ruler above his head, and violently smashed it down. Terrifying cold aura exploded, forming an ice mountain, and fell down, wrapping Jianan and the other four within it. Jianan and the other four's faces changed drastically, and they all used their own techniques, trying to block Xianqi's attack. However, the five of them were barely able to block it. After all, Xianqi was a genuine 9th-level emperor, and he was also the senior direct disciple of the profound Ming Peak. His strength was extremely terrifying. Boom! The five of them groaned, and under the terrifying pressure, they knelt on the ground with one knee. The ground they were standing on collapsed, and a vacuum was formed around them. The five of them could only barely hold on. Pretty tenacious, Xianqi said faintly. He raised the huge ruler again and smashed it down. Immediately, Jianan and the other four swayed, and they could not stand steadily. Boom! 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 Xianqi did not show any mercy, and smashed down again and again. Moreover, its speed was getting faster and faster, and the power that it formed was getting more and more terrifying. Jianan and the other four involuntarily spat out a mouthful of blood. When the two guards at the mountain gate saw this scene, their eyes flickered, and they felt a little strange. However, Jianan and the other four were geniuses of the Divine Academy, and Xianqi was actually so ruthless. Of course, Xianqi was after all the senior direct disciple of the profound Ming Peak. Regardless of whether it was his background or his strength, he was extremely powerful, and the two of them did not dare to intervene. Xianqi, you're shameless. Moyan Wuxiang's beautiful eyes were filled with anger, and she could not help but shout at Xianqi, shameless? I'm just teaching my junior brothers and sisters a lesson. How is that shameless? You should be thanking me. Xianqi chuckled, and raised the huge ruler with his right hand again. The cold aura around him became violent, and a huge snowstorm was formed. This is the last time. Let's see if you can withstand it. Having said that, Xianqi raised the huge ruler, and the snowstorm became even more violent, crushing down. Bang! Chapter 1386. Berserk. The beautiful figure gently stretched out a snow-white hand. Following that, a fire lotus that was dozens of feet wide bloomed, blocking in front of her like a shield. The snowstorm was like a giant dragon as it swooped down, heavily slamming into the fire lotus. Following that, an ear-piercing explosion sound rang out. The cold energy and the flames intertwined and exploded, creating a terrifying energy ripple. The two energies only intertwined for 5 breaths of time, before they were completely annihilated. Muchen Xue? Xianqi narrowed his eyes as he stared at the beautiful figure below, and coldly snorted. The beautiful figure was slender and elegant, like an ice lotus on a snowy mountain. She had a unique aura, like a lotus that could not be profaned. Elder sister Chen Xue. Mu Qinshua's action made Moyan Wuxiang and the other four feel much more relaxed. The 5 of them stood up and looked at the beautiful figure in front of them with grateful eyes. The one who spoke was Moyan Wuxiang. Mu Qinshu tilted her head and nodded at the 5 people behind her. Her beautiful eyes fell onto Xianqi in the sky as she coldly said, Qianqi, have you forgotten the rules of the academy? Students of the same academy are not allowed to kill each other. Are you not going against the rules by doing this? Qianqi licked his lips and said with a cold smile. Killing each other? You're thinking too much. It was clearly these fellows who offended their superiors. Who do they think they are? They actually dared to insult me in public. So what if I kill them? Of course, I'm a very kind person. I won't really kill them, I'll just teach them a lesson. When these words came out, Moi and Wuxiang and the other four revealed angry looks. The first one to cause trouble was Qianqi. But now Qianqi was pushing the blame onto them. It was a little shameless. What happened? Mu Qianxue revealed a puzzled look. She turned to look at Moi and Wuxiang and the other four and asked. Elder sister Chen Shui, it's actually like this. Moi and Wuxiang came to Mu Qianshue's side and whispered to her about what had happened earlier. Lu Hantian was taken away by the Martial Saint Tower? Mu Qianshue's beautiful eyes narrowed, and her face gradually turned cold. She naturally understood the relationship between Zhuowen and Lu Hantian. Zhuowen had also told her some things about Lu Hantian. In the Qingxian Empire, Lu Hantian had given Zhuowen a lot of help. Zhuowen was not an ungrateful person. If he knew that Lu Hantian had been captured by the Martial Saint Tower, Zhuowen would definitely charge into the Martial Saint Tower and demand for him. Qianqi, you're abusing your position to avenge a personal grudge. Mu Qianshue's beautiful eyes fell on Qianqi. The coldness in her eyes had reached its peak. Qianqi's eyes were cold as he said indifferently, I heard that Lu Hantian took advantage of the young miss of the Martial Saint Tower, and this Lu Hantian is Zhuowen's best friend. One is marked by the company one keeps. What kind of person makes what kind of friends? Looks like that Zhuowen isn't a good person. You are the shameless one. What right do you have to talk about Zhuowen? Mu Qianxue said in a deep voice. She took a step forward, and her delicate body was like a graceful butterfly. As she suddenly appeared in front of Qianqi, she stretched out her slender hand, and countless fire lotuses bloomed. Among the countless fire lotuses, a huge fire dragon was exposed. The dragon's scales on the surface of the dragon were flames, and it looked extremely strange. Qianqi's eyes narrowed. His right hand held the handle of the giant ruler, and he exerted strength in his palm. He then threw it out, and several snowstorms burst out from the giant ruler. Rumble! The snowstorms and the fire dragon collided. Following that, the surrounding space, which was dozens of feet wide, trembled violently under the energy ripples from the collision. It was as if the space was about to collapse. 5 breaths later, the two terrifying energies were completely annihilated. The annihilation energy even created countless spatial cracks in the surrounding space. Thud! 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 Mu Qianxue and Qianqi both took a few steps back. Qianqi's eyes were filled with seriousness. He looked directly at Mu Qianxue and said in a deep voice, Your cultivation has already broken through to the 9th level Emperor realm? Mu Qianshue's lips curled into a mocking smile. She said, In 2 years, as long as you are not a pig, you will have improved. Hearing that, Qianqi's face turned pale. Mu Qianshue's words were extremely sarcastic. She was saying that he was a pig. Qianqi was also at the 9th level Emperor realm, and he was only half a step away from the invincible Emperor realm. Although it was only half a step, it was like a heavenly moat to Qianqi that was difficult to cross. Although Qianqi also comprehended the law of mysterious underworld and had Xianzhong's personal guidance, his comprehension was much weaker than Jian Mu's. This was also the reason why he had not comprehended it yet. You are courting death. Qianqi roared angrily. The cold air around his body became thicker and thicker, and the cold air became more and more vigorous. In the end, it turned into a snow giant that was the size of a small mountain. It was Qianqi's armor soul. As soon as the snow giant appeared, it roared and rushed towards Mu Qianxue. At the same time, Qianqi fell like a meteor. He held the giant ruler and smashed it down without mercy. Mu Qianshue's eyes were solemn. She had just broken through to the 9th level Emperor realm, and there was still a gap between her and Qianqi. Therefore, she had to be careful when facing Qianqi's full attack. However, just as Mu Qianxue was about to use her full strength to deal with the attack, A tall figure appeared in front of Mu Qinxue. The figure clenched his right hand, and the formless law energy condensed into a sharp longsword. Then, the longsword swept out, and the sword light burst out like the moonlight. Crack! The sound of glass shattering was heard. The sword light landed on the snow giant, and the latter roared and shattered into pieces. The moment the snow giant shattered, the figure's eyes were emotionless. He took a step forward, and instantly appeared in front of Qianqi. He swung his right hand, and the emotionless longsword hit the giant ruler. Clang! The sound of metal clashing resounded. Then, Qianqi's eyes narrowed as he realized that the giant ruler was emitting an irresistible force. Then, the giant ruler in his hand began to crumble. Puff! Qianqi spat out a mouthful of blood and fell from the sky. He crashed onto the ground, causing the ground to shake violently. Jianmu! Qianqi propped himself up with his right hand and looked up at the tall figure that suddenly appeared. His eyes were filled with shock and anger. Jianmu looked down from above, holding the giant emotionless longsword in his hand. He looked down at Qianqi indifferently without saying a word. This made Qianqi's hair stand on end. Before Jianmu had become an invincible emperor lord, his strength was at most on par with him. Now that Jianmu had become an invincible emperor lord, his strength had soared tremendously. He couldn't even withstand a single blow from Jianmu. Mu Qinxue stared at Jianmu in front of her, and her beautiful eyes flickered. She also fell silent and didn't say a word. You know why I took action, Jianmu said coldly. Qianqi's eyes flickered and he snorted. Just as he was about to speak, a violent vibration came. The vibration became more and more violent, and it instantly attracted the attention of the entire inner courtyard. What's going on? What's going on? Mo and Wushang and the others raised their heads and asked curiously. Mu Qinxue, Jianmu and Qianqi raised their heads at the same time. Their gazes pierced through the clouds and landed on the giant palace in the middle of the 9 peaks. Their eyes were filled with different emotions. They saw that the ice and fire dual polarity palace, which stood in the middle of the 9 peaks, was emitting a terrifying and powerful ice and fire energy. Every beam of ice and fire energy was like a giant dragon. Is the ice and fire energy starting to go berserk again? Many disciples of the 9 peaks were attracted by the unusual situation of the ice and fire dual polarity palace. They raised their heads and looked over. However, their eyes were filled with fear. Back then, when the ice and fire dual polarity palace went berserk, it left a deep impression on them. In the deepest part of the 18th level of the ice and fire dual polarity palace, there was an extremely dense and terrifying ice and fire energy. In this level of space, a lonely figure was sitting cross-legged motionless. When the ice and fire energy in this level of space became extremely berserk, the figure suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes had become extremely strange. His right eye was ice blue, and it was filled with cold air. His left eye was fiery red, and it was scorching hot. When the figure completely opened his eyes, the ice and fire energy in the 18th level became even more berserk. It almost set off a hurricane. An ordinary person wouldn't be able to endure for long in such a terrifying ice and fire hurricane. He would be torn into pieces. However, the figure seemed to be unaffected. The ice and fire sacred symbol has finally been completely refined. From now on, I am not only the symbol spirit of the ice and fire sacred symbol, but I am also the owner of the ice and fire sacred symbol. Zhuowen slowly stood up and stretched his back. His blue and red eyes gave off an even more bewitching light, making him look extremely strange. A Xiaohe dog quietly hovered near the figure. Its small black eyes were filled with admiration as it said, "This kid is actually able to think of such a method to completely control the ice and fire sacred symbol in just over 2 years. He really isn't simple." In the past 2 years, Zhuowen had tried countless methods to control the sacred symbol, but none of them were successful. Later on, Zhuowen thought of the symbol spirit suppressed in the ice and fire palace. He used the symbol spirit's affinity with the sacred symbol to forcefully fuse his sea of consciousness with the symbol spirit. This attempt was very dangerous. If he wasn't careful, he could be devoured by the symbol spirit. Fortunately, Zhuowen had inherited the Baifeng sea of consciousness, which was comparable to an arcane Saint Master's. Although the symbol spirit was powerful, it couldn't be compared to an arcane Saint Master's Sea of Consciousness. In the end, it was assimilated by Zhuowen's Sea of Consciousness. This was also why Zhuowen's eyes were blue and red, the same as the symbol spirits. The ice and fire sacred symbol. It's time to test its power. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed as an unprecedented light erupted from his eyes. Soon after, the ice and fire sacred symbol trapped in the cage let out an ear-piercing screech. Boom! 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 The energy of ice and fire surged like a tsunami, wreaking havoc. Under the terrifying energy, the cage was also on the verge of collapse. The surface of the cage almost cracked. Crack! Chapter 1387. Leaving the hall. Ice Flame Holy Talisman, huh? Zhuowen's eyes flickered. He extended his right hand and held the Ice Flame Holy Talisman in his palm. Hiss hiss hiss. The Ice Flame Holy Talisman buzzed the moment Zhuowen extended his hand. Subsequently, a terrifying suction force appeared and sucked away all the ice and fire energy on the 18th level. In less than a moment, the ice and fire energy on the 18th level completely disappeared. The surroundings appeared empty and pitch black. Moreover, Zhuowen discovered that the suction force on the Ice Flame Holy Talisman did not disappear the moment the ice and fire energy on the 18th level disappeared. Instead, it became even stronger. It is absorbing the ice and fire energy on the other 17 levels of the Ice and Fire Dual Extreme Hall. Zhuowen, you have to stop it. Xiao He suddenly reminded. Zhuowen's pupil shrunk. With a thought, two different colors, ice and fire, erupted from his eyes. Immediately, the suction force on the Ice Flame Holy Talisman weakened and finally disappeared. Xiao He, why do you want me to stop the Ice Flame Holy Talisman from absorbing the ice and fire energy in the Ice and Fire Dual Extreme Hall? Zhuowen asked doubtfully. Xiao He said indifferently. If the Ice Flame Holy Talisman absorbs all the ice and fire energy in the Ice and Fire Dual Extreme Hall, it will be very easy for the three old fellows in the inner academy to sense it. At that time, those three old fellows will not let you off so easily. Zhuowen nodded in understanding upon hearing this. Xiao He was right. If the ice and fire energy was completely absorbed, it was likely that the entire inner academy would be shaken. At that time, he would become the greatest suspect if he came out. If I take away the Ice Flame Holy Talisman, I'm afraid that the ice and fire energy in the Ice and Fire Dual Extreme Hall will eventually dry up with the passage of time, right? Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and said, Of course. Therefore, I suggest that you leave half of the essence of the Ice Flame Holy Talisman in the Ice and Fire Dual Extreme Hall, while you take the main body of the Ice Flame Holy Talisman with you. Once you are strong enough, you can take back the remaining essence. At that time, the inner academy will not make things difficult for you. Zhuowen revealed a hesitant expression upon hearing this. If half of the essence was extracted, the power of the Ice Flame Holy Talisman would definitely decrease. Zhuowen was somewhat unwilling in his heart. Why are you hesitating? You're only in the sovereign realm, so you can't unleash the full power of the Saint Talisman. Only when you reach the Saint realm can you unleash its full power. Half of the origin is enough for you. Xiao He glared at him and continued. Moreover, your strength will undergo another transformation once you become a saint. At that time, those three old fellows from the inner court won't be able to stop you. Looks like that's the only way. Zhuowen sighed softly. According to Xiao He's instructions, he used his mind to control and extract the ice and fire energy from the holy symbol of ice and fire. Instantly, the entire 18th floor was filled with extremely terrifying ice and fire energy. The surface of the Ice Fire Saint Talisman also dimmed. Although half of the Ice Fire Saint symbol has been extracted, the Ice Fire Saint symbol is in your hands. You can take it back at any time in the future. Moreover, if you use the ice and fire laws to condense the Ice Fire Palace, its power will be extremely terrifying. Even though you're only at the 7th level of the Monarch realm now, you're strong enough to fight against an invincible Monarch Lord. Not just an ordinary invincible Monarch Lord, but one who has comprehended a powerful law. Xiao He floated quietly in front of Zhuowen, Her small eyes were extremely lively. Zhuowen nodded. In the past 2 years in the Ice and Fire Dual Polarity Palace, Zhuowen had put all his effort into controlling the Ice-Fire Saint symbol. Even if he didn't deliberately cultivate, the ice and fire energy had been refining his meridians at every moment, allowing his cultivation to naturally increase from the 5th level of the Emperor Realm to the 7th level of the Emperor Realm. Moreover, according to the division of strength, Zhuowen already had the strength of an invincible Emperor Lord. Zhuowen held the Ice-Fire Saint symbol in his right hand. Then, he saw that the symbol floating in his palm began to emit 2 extremely powerful law energies. One was the law of fire, and the other was the law of ice. The 2 law energies turned into 2 long lines, and with a whoosh, they drilled into Zhuowen's eyes. Immediately, Zhuowen's icy blue right eye was filled with the cold and biting laws of ice, while his fiery red left eye was filled with the blazing laws of fire. As your sea of consciousness has merged with the Ice-Fire Saint symbol's spirit, your eyes can bear the 2 law energies of the Ice-Fire Saint symbol. You can name your right eye the ice eye, and your left the fire eye. However, it's best if you don't reveal these 2 eyes that contain the law energies. After all, there are still people in the 9 Nether Realm who can recognize the Ice-Fire Saint symbol in your eyes. Xiao He floated in front of Zhuowen. Her voice became extremely solemn. Zhuowen's bewitching eyes stared straight at Xiao He. Then, the blue and red in his eyes slowly converged as he said in a deep voice, "Unless it's absolutely necessary, I naturally won't reveal it. Let's go. You can leave now," Xiao He said indifferently. Zhuowen nodded and took a step forward. His eyes began to fill with blue and red colors. Then, the violent ice and fire energies in the surroundings began to condense crazily, turning into a giant ice and fire dragon. The giant ice and fire dragon lowered its body, lying in front of Zhuowen. Zhuowen stepped on the dragon's body and said indifferently, "Let's go." Roar. The giant ice and fire dragon roared angrily and rushed out, disappearing from the 18th floor in an instant. At this moment, the ice and fire energies on the surface of the Ice and Fire Twin Extremes Palace became extremely violent. The disciples of the 9 Peaks were all shocked and frightened. They were all discussing what had happened in the Ice and Fire Twin Extremes Palace. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 9 figures flew out from the 9 Peaks and floated around the Ice and Fire Twin Extremes Palace. Their eyes all became extremely solemn. What's going on? What's wrong with the Ice and Fire Twin Extremes Palace? Lu Yuanhua was an impatient person, so he asked casually, "We need to ask Marshal Uncle Yanji and the others to take a look." Old Man Tian, Du said with a serious face. Then the other 8 turned to look at Xiaoyu. After all, Yanji and the other 2 were frequent guests of the mysterious Origin Peak. The 3 of them often comprehended the Void Law and the Void Stone Steel. Although they hadn't comprehended it for many years, the 3 of them persevered. They were 3 stubborn old men. Xiaoyu curled his lips and said, "I wonder where those 3 old men have gone. I don't know either. They might have gone into seclusion. What should we do?" Old Man Tian, Du said with a worried face. However, as soon as his voice fell, the Ice and Fire Twin Extremes Palace shook even more violently. Then, with a dragon roar, a giant ice and fire dragon flew out from the void above the Ice and Fire Twin Extremes Palace. A figure stood proudly on the giant dragon's head. "That's Zhuowen?" Xiaoyu stared at the figure. His indifferent eyes were suddenly filled with excitement. He didn't expect Zhuowen to come out of the Ice and Fire Twin Extremes Palace alive. "Zhuowen, brother Zhua." The huge commotion in the Ice and Fire Twin Extremes Palace naturally attracted the attention of Mu Qinxue and the others. Among them, Mu Qinxue, Moyan Wushang, and the others were pleasantly surprised. Jianmu narrowed his eyes. The ruthless look on his face became more intense. As for Xianqi, his face was gloomy. He licked his lips and revealed a cruel smile. He said in a low voice, "Looks like he's really lucky. He's still alive after staying in there for so long. Moreover, his cultivation base has reached the 7th level Emperor Realm." Whoosh, whoosh, Mu Qinxue, Mo Yin Wushang, and the rest of the 6 immediately rushed towards the mountain gate. Jianmu frowned slightly and quietly followed behind. Just in time. We'll settle the old and new grudges together. Zhuan. Qianqi snorted, and also rushed towards the mountain gate. The giant ice and fire dragon merely paused in the void for a moment, before returning to the ice and fire duel extreme hall. Zhuo Wen, on the other hand, surveyed his surroundings and stared at the 9 great peak masters with a strange expression in his eyes. It seemed like he had caused a huge commotion when he came out. It actually attracted the attention of the 9 peak masters. Moreover, all the disciples on the 9 peaks were pointing at him. Zhuowen, that's great. You're still alive. That's great. Before Zhuowen could react, a figure rushed in front of him. Xiaoyu grabbed Zhuowen's shoulders tightly, and his face was filled with excitement. Xiaoyu's strength was a little strong, causing Zhuowen to frown slightly. However, Zhuowen didn't move away. He just looked at Xiaoyu quietly. Seeing how excited Xiaoyu was, he knew that Xiaoyu was very concerned about him. Zhuowen also felt a warm current in his heart. Zhuowen, what happened to you on the 18th floor of the Ice and Fire Twin Extremes Palace? The Ice and Fire Holy Talisman should be trapped there, right? How did you come back safely? Old man Tiandu asked with a face full of disbelief. Zhuowen said with a puzzled face, I'm not too sure about this. After I entered the 18th floor, I couldn't withstand the ice and fire energy inside and fainted. When I woke up, I was lying on the Ice and Fire Twin Extremes Dragon. And the Ice and Fire Twin Extremes Dragon naturally carried me out. In fact, I'm not too sure about what happened. Zhuowen naturally couldn't say anything about refining the Ice and Fire Holy Talisman. Otherwise, he would be killed by the 9 peak masters. Zhuowen didn't think that his life was too long. After listening to Zhuowen's explanation, except for Xiaoyu, the other 8 peak masters looked at each other in dismay. Their eyes were full of doubts. Obviously, they weren't convinced by Zhuowen's explanation. However, even if they had doubts, they wouldn't have thought that Zhuowen could completely refine and control the Ice and Fire Holy Talisman. At most, they guessed that Zhuowen had obtained some kind of benefit from it, which was why he had delayed coming out for so long. Swoosh, swoosh. Mu Qinxue, Moyan Wushang, and the others came to the surroundings of the Ice and Fire Twin Extremes Palace. Among them, Mu Qinxue rushed in front of Zhuowen and fiercely threw herself into Zhuowen's arms. Zhuowen was startled. He hugged her tightly in his arms and said softly, Sorry, I came out a little late. It's okay. As long as you can come out. It doesn't matter if you're late or not. Mu Qinxue smiled sweetly. Moyan Wushang stood behind Mu Qinxue and forced a smile. However, he still smiled and said, Zhuowen, it's good that you can come out. Wushang, thank you. Zhuowen nodded to Moyan Wushang. At the same time, Zhuowen also nodded to Qingyin, Imo Lingtian, Kanan and Gatha who were beside Moyan Wushang. Whoosh! Chapter 1388. Until death swoosh. Another figure flew over. Qianqi arrived beside Qianzhong in a slightly wretched state. Qianzhong frowned when he noticed Qianqi's wretched state. He asked, Qianqi, what happened to you? Why are you in such a wretched state? Qianqi's expression was slightly ugly. He said in a deep voice, Nothing. Qianqi's gaze fell on Zhuowen and Mu Qinxue as he spoke. His eyes were filled with hatred as he continued. Master, didn't you say that you can let me try with Zhuowen? I think it's time now, right? The corners of Qianzhong's mouth curled up when he heard this, and he said, Of course. At that time, I'll create a good opportunity for you to teach this little bastard a lesson. Qianzhong had wanted to teach Zhuowen a lesson since a long time ago. However, he couldn't do it due to Zhuowen's status as an elder. Qianqi was the direct disciple of the profound underworld peak, and Zhuowen was the direct disciple of the profound origin peak. Naturally, Qianqi was the most suitable person to do it. In addition, Zhuowen was only at the 7th level Martial Emperor realm, which was 2 levels lower than Qianqi. Qianzhong believed that Qianqi would be able to teach Zhuowen a lesson. Zhuowen, Senior Hantian is in trouble. Mu Qinxue blushed as she left Zhuowen's embrace, and suddenly said to Zhuowen, Trouble? What happened to Brother Hantian? Zhuowen asked anxiously. It's that bastard Qianqi's fault. That guy. Jiannan's character was similar to Lu Yuanhua's. He told Xianzhong everything that had happened. The more Zhuowen listened, the gloomier his face became. Murderous intent even appeared in his eyes. He stared at Qianqi and said coldly, "You helped the disciples of the Martial Saint Tower to capture Brother Hantian?" Qianqi, who was communicating with Xianzhong, was stunned as he did not expect Zhuowen to suddenly target him. "You mean that shameless bastard? Hee. I heard that guy molested the young miss of the Martial Saint Tower. I'm already being merciful by not killing such a shameless bastard. Save him. What a joke. Of course your scoundrel friends aren't good people. I think you're the same," Qianqi said in a neutral tone. "Shut up," Mu Qinxue said angrily. However, Mu Qinxue was stopped by Zhuowen. Zhuowen's eyes were extremely cold as he stared at Qianqi. He nonchalantly said, "Your mouth stinks. If you slap yourself, I might spare your life." Qianqi was stunned when these words were spoken. It was not only Qianqi, the others were also stunned. They did not expect Zhuowen to say such arrogant words the moment he stepped out of the Ice and Fire Duel Extreme Hall. Qianqi was the first direct disciple of the profound underworld peak. He was very talented. Although his cultivation was only at the 9th Heaven Emperor realm, his strength was much stronger than other cultivators of the same level. Although Zhuowen was also talented, he was only at the 7th Heaven Emperor realm. There was still a gap between the two of them. However, Zhuowen's arrogant words caused many people to be confused. Of course, this included Qianqi. "Slap yourself? Spare my life. Who do you think you are? How dare you say such words?" Qianqi sneered. "If that's the case, I, Zhuowen, will challenge you today. Life and death will be decided by the heavens. The living will win, and the dead will lose. We won't stop until death," Zhuowen said indifferently. Qianqi's smile disappeared as soon as these words were spoken. He squinted his eyes and said coldly, "Life and death battle? What? You don't dare?" Zhuowen said provocatively. "Life and death battle?" Zhuowen's voice was very loud, and all the surrounding disciples of the 9 peaks heard it clearly. Every one of them revealed a surprised expression. In the academy, disciples were not allowed to kill each other. Of course, there was an exception, and that was a life and death battle. However, this kind of battle was usually proposed because the conflict between the two parties had reached an irreconcilable stage, and they would not stop until death. Although there were life and death battles in the academy, they were very rare. After all, this kind of battle was too extreme. Once the battle started, one party had to die. "Zhuowen, don't be impulsive. There's no need to propose a life and death battle." Xiaoyu was anxious. Qianqi was not a simple person. He was really afraid that Zhuowen would get into trouble because of his impulsiveness. Mu Qinxue also looked at Zhuowen worriedly. However, she did not say anything because she believed in Zhuowen and supported Zhuowen's decision. "Martial Uncle Xiaoyu is right. Zhuowen, you don't have to be so impulsive," Moi and Wushang, Jianan and the others also advised. Zhuowen shook his head and said, "You guys don't have to say anything. I must kill Qianqi." Zhuowen was really angry this time. Lu Hantian, and he had a good relationship. Lu Hantian had helped him a lot in the past, and they could be considered as friends. After hearing that Lu Hantian had been betrayed by Qianqi to the Martial Saint Tower, how could Zhuowen not be angry? "Do you agree or not?" Zhuowen raised his head and stared at Qianqi as he asked coldly. Qianqi's face froze and he sneered. "Since you don't know what's good for you, why wouldn't I agree?" Xianzhong, who was standing behind Qianqi, frowned. He felt that something was wrong. However, when he thought about how Zhuowen was only a 7th rank emperor realm, he was not very worried. Seeing that the two of them had agreed, Xiaoyu opened his mouth and sighed. He did not expect that the two of them would really have a life and death battle. However, since the two of them had already decided, he could not say anything. He could only pray that Zhuowen would not lose. "Martial Uncle Tiandu, you preside over the life and death battle. I'm afraid that after I kill Qianqi, the old man behind him will jump up and down and cause trouble for me." Zhuowen glanced at Xianzhong and said indifferently, "Who are you calling an old man?" Xianzhong's eyes were gloomy. The law of mysterious underworld was like a snake swimming around his body as he stared at Zhuowen with hostility. What do you think? Zhuowen could not be bothered to be polite to Xianzhong. Back then, Xianzhong had wanted to kill him. The two of them had already fallen out and Zhuowen could not be bothered to be polite. All right, stop arguing. I'll preside over the life and death battle. Old man Tiandu quickly mediated. Xianzhong snorted and said, You don't know what's good for you. You'll regret it when you die. Zhuowen shrugged and did not say anything. Instead, he said indifferently, Let's begin. I'm in a hurry. Old man Tiandu nodded and said, The two of you go to the top of the Hall of Ice and Fire. That can be your main battlefield. Hearing that, Xianqi flew to the top of the Hall of Ice and Fire. He clenched his right hand in the air and immediately, rolling cold air condensed into a giant ruler. He stared at Zhuowen provocatively and said, Why aren't you coming to die? Xianqi's voice was very loud, like rolling thunder, and it attracted the attention of many disciples of the Nine Peaks. Xianqi and Zhuowen are going to have a life and death battle. Is there some kind of grudge between them? They're going to have a life and death battle? The disciples of the Nine Peaks all looked up in confusion. At the same time, there was a heated uproar around them. The one who's courting death is not me but you. Zhuowen did not bother to talk nonsense with Xianqi. He jumped up and reached out with his right hand. Suddenly, the tiger head clear golden spear appeared in his palm. His celestial force surged out and gathered on the tiger head clear golden spear, turning into a dazzling white light. At the same time, Zhuowen used the 7 emotions treasured seal. The 4 great treasured seals of sorrow, fear, evil, and desire were like 4 mountains that crushed down and pressed down on Xianqi's body, causing its movements to slightly stagnate. The happiness, anger, and love treasured seals were used on Zhuowen, increasing his strength and increasing Zhuowen's strength by a lot. Xiaoyu had given him the complete version of the 7 emotions treasured seal. Zhuowen had spent some time in the Hall of Ice and Fire to successfully cultivate it. Damn it, it's the 7 emotions treasured seal. Xianqi felt his body become heavier, as if a huge mountain was pressing down on him. He roared furiously and grabbed the giant ruler with both hands. He slammed it down hard. Instantly, a terrifying force spread out from his center and spread in all directions. The weakening power of the sorrow, fear, evil, and desire treasured seals was greatly reduced. Xianqi bounced his legs and shot out like a cannonball, charging toward Zhuowen. Zhuowen was not afraid. He swung the tiger head clear golden spear, causing a deafening tiger's roar to spread across the sky. Clang! The giant ruler and the long spear clashed. Instantly, the sound of metal clashing rang out, piercing through the clouds. Xianqi was then pushed back a few steps, while Zhuowen was pushed back a few steps. What? Xianqi is at a disadvantage in this exchange. Xianzhong's eyes widened as he exclaimed in astonishment. Xiaoyu's eyes glittered. It was obvious that Zhuowen's strength had exceeded his expectations. How is this possible? Xianqi roared unwillingly. He immediately summoned the soul-armored snow giant. He stepped on the giant's shoulder and continued to charge forward. He planned to kill Zhuowen with this attack. Heavenly Dragon Lock Seal. Zhuowen shouted in an indifferent voice. The dragon seal on his right palm lit up. Soon after, thick black chains shot out from all directions, completely binding the ice giant. Even Xianqi, who was standing on the giant's shoulder, was bound by the chains. He could not move at all. What are these chains? Damn it! Xianqi's eyes were filled with shock and anger. These strange black chains were extremely tough. He could not break free from them at all. Die! Zhuowen was like a flowing light, instantly arriving before Xianqi. The tiger head clear golden spear was like a venomous snake, aiming at Xianqi's vitals, wanting to pierce through him. However, just as Zhuowen's spear was about to pierce through Xianqi's vitals, a mysterious underworld law descended from the sky and blasted towards Zhuowen. Xianzhong, you bastard! No one had expected this to happen. They were all stunned. When Xiaoyu came back to his senses, he cursed. He took a step forward and charged towards Zhuowen. It was unknown when Xianzhong had appeared above Zhuowen's head. The law of the underworld transformed into countless black pythons that coiled around Zhuowen and restrained him tightly. Zhuowen's killing intent was extremely dense. His left eye suddenly turned fiery red. Violent fire law swept out, and a sea of fire covered the sky. It blocked the mysterious underworld law that descended from the sky. Chapter 1389. Martial Saint Towerpuchi. The sound of a spear piercing through flesh resounded throughout the entire void. It was exceptionally ear-piercing. Xianqi spat out a mouthful of blood as he stared blankly at the tiger-head-deep golden spear that pierced through his chest. How can you be so strong? You're only a 7th-level martial emperor. Xianqi spat out the words with difficulty. Zhuowen looked indifferent as he said, "You can go down and ask King Yama." With that, Zhuowen twisted his right hand, and the spear spun at high speed. Xianqi's body instantly crumbled, turning into a bloody mist. The nascent soul in his body was grasped by Zhuowen. Hiss! Hiss! Gasps rang out one after another. Everyone from the 9 peaks stared blankly at this scene. The head direct disciple of the profound underworld peak, Xianqi, had been killed just like that. This was too fast. It was practically an instant kill. Bastard! Xianzhong's eyes turned crimson red. The Xianming law was extremely terrifying. It instantly extinguished the sea of fire in front of him, and he continued to attack Zhuowen. Xianqi was raised by him. Now that Zhuowen had killed Xianqi in front of him, it was like slapping his face. He even wanted to kill Zhuowen now. However, before Xianzhong could reach Zhuowen, he was stopped by Xiaoyu. The terrifying law of fire was emitted from Xiaoyu's body, forming a huge fire dragon that prevented Xianzhong from getting close to Zhuowen. "Xianzhong, you even interfered in the life and death battle. Do you have any shame?" Xiaoyu said in a deep voice. Xianzhong's eyes turned red as he said coldly, "He killed Xianqi, my disciple." The life and death battle was decided by both parties. Since Xianqi lost, it's normal for him to die. Xiaoyu sneered. Xiaoyu is right. Xianzhong. The life and death battle was decided by Zhuowen and Xianqi since Xianqi was killed because he was inferior. It's not Zhuowen's fault. Old man Tiandu came to Xiaoyu's side and shook his head at Xianzhong. "You." Xianzhong pointed at old man Tiandu and Xiaoyu with a gloomy face. Then he looked at Zhuowen and said, "Xianqi's nascent soul is still in your hands. Now that you've won, hand it over." Zhuowen sneered. "Hand it over? Do you take me for a fool?" With that, Zhuowen ignored Xianzhong and put Xianqi's nascent soul into his spirit ring. Xianzhong's face froze. His eyes were spitting fire as he roared, "Little bastard, you're good. You're good." After he finished speaking, Xianzhong flicked his sleeve and left. Looking at the back of Xianzhong, Zhuowen squinted his eyes and became alert. Zhuowen did not expect Xianzhong to leave so easily. He did not know what this old man was planning. Zhuowen started to be wary of Xianzhong. "Zhuowen, be careful of Xianzhong in the future. I'm afraid he won't let this go," Xiaoyu said to Zhuowen in a low voice. Zhuowen nodded. "I know." By the way, old man Xiao, do you have any information about the Martial Saint Tower? I need to go there. Martial Saint Tower? Why are you going there? Xiaoyu asked curiously. I have a friend who was captured by the Martial Saint Tower. I need to save him. Zhuowen smiled bitterly. Xiaoyu's eyes flashed. Since he's your friend, then I'll go with you to the Martial Saint Tower. The Martial Saint Tower is not weak in the Divine Spectre realm. It's ranked below the Divine Spectre Academy and the Great Thunderclap Temple. It's considered the third strongest force in the Divine Spectre realm. If I go, I think the Martial Saint Tower will give me face and let your friend go. Then I'll have to trouble you, old man Xiao. Zhuowen said gratefully. Xiaoyu waved his hand and said, Brat, after this matter is settled, quickly go into seclusion. The 9 Underworld Conference is about to begin. You have to add chi points for me. Also the Void Stone Tablet. I hope you can comprehend the Void Law as soon as possible. Zhuowen shrugged and said, Of course. Zhuowen, I'll go with you. Mu Qinxue came to Zhuowen's side and said, Qinxue, you can stay. With old man Xiao here, there won't be any problems. Zhuowen smiled. Hearing this, Mu Qinshue's beautiful eyes flashed. In the end, she nodded and said softly, Then be careful on the way. Zhuowen replied and said goodbye to Mo and Wushang, Mo Lingtian and the others. Then, he followed Xiao Yu out of the inner courtyard. After Zhuowen and Xiao Yu left, the discussions in the Nine Peaks became even more intense. Clearly, the battle just now was unexpected for many people. At the same time, after Zhuowen left, no one in the Nine Peaks noticed that a figure had quietly left the inner courtyard. The Martial Saint Tower wasn't very far from Jiaxin Institute. Zhuowen and Xiao Yu spent 3 days to arrive at the Martial Saint Tower. The Martial Saint Tower's most iconic symbol was the giant tower that stood in the middle of the plains. The tower had 10 floors, and each floor was dozens of feet tall. With the 10 floors added together, the Martial Saint Tower was hundreds of feet tall. The disciples of the Martial Saint Tower all lived in the tower. So this is the Martial Saint Tower? Zhuowen stood under the giant tower and pondered. He could even see through the windows on the side of the tower that there were people walking around. Clearly, they were the disciples of the Martial Saint Tower. On the first floor of the Martial Saint Tower, there was a huge stone arch. There were 2 guards on both sides of the door. Perhaps because they sensed the arrival of Zhuowen and Xiao Yu, the 2 guards were on alert. One of them said coldly, "Who are you two? You shouldn't be from the Martial Saint Tower, right?" "I am the Peak Master of Aoyuan Peak of Jiaxin Institute, Xiao Yu. This time, I have something to discuss with the Martial Saint. Quickly go and inform him," Xiao Yu said indifferently. The Peak Master of Jiaxin Institute? The 2 guards were stunned and looked at each other. Then, one of them quickly bowed and said, "Please wait for a moment. I will go and inform Senior Brother." "Senior Brother? Is the Martial Saint not here?" Xiao Yu frowned. "The Martial Saint is in seclusion. He plans to break through to the Saint Realm. Therefore, he can't come out to welcome you." The guard said carefully. Jiaxin Institute had 9 main peaks, and each peak master was a half-step saint. Their strength was not much different from the Martial Saint Tower's Martial Saint. Although the Martial Saint Tower's peak master was called Martial Saint, his cultivation had not reached the Saint Realm. He was only a half-step saint. However, the Martial Saint had comprehended an extremely powerful law. It was the law of martialism. Although he was only a half-step saint, he was a top expert among the half-step saints. If it was a head-on clash, Xiao Yu would not be a match for the Martial Saint. However, he had Jiaxin Institute behind him. Therefore, the Martial Saint Tower did not dare to offend the people of Jiaxin Institute, especially people like the peak masters of the 9 peaks. "Then go and inform him," Xiao Yu said indifferently. The guard responded and hurriedly entered the tower. Not long after, the guard came out again. At the same time, he brought out an extremely tall man in golden armor. This man had a head of long golden hair like a majestic army. His eyes were suffused with a golden glow, looking sharp and intimidating. "So it is the Peak Master of Aoyuan Peak. I have long heard of your name. I am Lung Quan, the Martial Saint Tower's senior disciple." Lung Quan walked slowly in front of Xiao Yu. He had a warm smile on his face and bowed to Xiao Yu. "This is..." Lung Quan turned to look at Zhuowen and asked with a smile. "He is my direct disciple Zhuowen," Xiao Yu said indifferently. "So it is Junior Zhuowen." Lung Quan nodded. He did not pay much attention to Zhuowen. It was obvious that a 7th-level Emperor Realm expert was not worthy of his attention. He only nodded at him politely. "May I know why Peak Master Xiao Yu has come to the Martial Saint Tower?" Lung Quan asked with a smile. "Senior Brother Lung Quan, are you not going to invite us in first? It doesn't seem right to leave us hanging outside," Zhuowen said indifferently. Lung Quan frowned and said with a smile, "Junior Zhuowen is right. Come with me." As he spoke, Lung Quan led the way while Zhuowen and Xiao Yu followed him into the pagoda. The interior of the pagoda was very spacious. The disciples inside were all wearing golden armor. In the middle of the first level of the pagoda, there was a statue. The statue depicted a handsome middle-aged man. His eyes were as dazzling as the stars. "This is my master. He is also the owner of the Martial Saint Tower." Lung Quan smiled and pointed at the statue. "The Martial Saint." Zhuowen stared at the statue with sparkling eyes. He had heard from Xiao Yu that the Martial Saint was a famous genius in the divine nether realm. He had comprehended the law of martial, and had a strong pursuit of the martial Tao. "Greetings, eldest senior brother." Along the way, Many disciples greeted Lung Quan respectfully. Zhuowen even saw a hint of fear in the disciples' eyes. It was as if they were afraid of Lung Quan. Lung Quan only nodded in response. The group soon arrived at the depths of the tower. There was a large hall with neatly arranged wooden chairs. "Please have a seat," Lung Quan said with a smile. Zhuowen and Xiaoyu naturally did not stand on ceremony and casually sat on the chairs. "May I know why the two of you have come to the Martial Saint Tower this time?" Lung Quan asked. "To ask for a person?" Zhuowen replied coldly. Lung Quan narrowed his eyes and said, "Who?" "Lu Hantian." Lung Quan's face stiffened when he heard that. Soon after, he recovered his calm and said, "Lu Hantian is a traitor of the Martial Saint Tower. He has already betrayed the Martial Saint Tower and has not been caught yet." "Not caught? Are you sure?" Zhuowen asked with a frown. "Of course I'm sure. I have no reason to lie to you about this." Lung Quan smiled. Zhuowen stood up and said, "Then do you dare to let me search the entire Martial Saint Tower?" The smile on Lung Quan's face froze and said, "Junior brother Zhuowen, do you not believe me?" "Of course I believe you. However, I just want to confirm it. After all, senior brother Lung Quan can also overlook things sometimes, right?" Zhuowen said calmly. "Peak leader Xiaoyu, are you here to cause trouble today? I've already said that Lu Hantian is not in the Martial Saint Tower." Lung Quan's face turned completely gloomy. "Then I'll search it." Zhuowen completely ignored Lung Quan and walked towards the second floor of the Martial Saint Tower. However, before he could take a few steps, Lung Quan blocked his path. Chapter 1390. The Law of Fire. Zhuowen's face gradually darkened. Lung Quan's attempts to stop him had already made him feel that something was wrong. Combined with what Mu Chenxue had said, he was sure that Lu Hantian was imprisoned in the Martial Saint Tower. "Lung Quan, Zhuowen's words are a little harsh. You don't have to take it to heart. He just wants to take a look around the Martial Saint Tower. I don't think you'll object to that, right?" Xiaoyu suddenly came between Zhuowen and Lung Quan and tried to smooth things over. Lung Quan frowned. Since Xiaoyu had spoken so tactfully, it would be suspicious if he still tried to stop him. "If you want to go in and take a look, you can. However, there are rules in the Martial Saint Tower. You can only enter the corresponding level after passing the test of each level. I wonder if Junior Zhuowen can enter the higher levels?" Lung Quan said indifferently. Then he stepped aside and no longer obstructed Zhuowen. Zhuowen looked at Xiaoyu in confusion. Obviously, he did not know the so-called rules of the Martial Saint Tower. "Zhuowen, the Martial Saint Tower follows the principle of survival of the fittest. There are a total of 10 floors in the tower. The higher you go, the more cultivation resources there are, and the higher the requirements are. Normally, every floor corresponds to a minor level of the Emperor Realm. For example, the first level can be entered by a first-level Emperor Realm cultivator. The second level is for a second-level Emperor Realm cultivator, and so on. The 9th level is for a 9th-level Emperor Realm cultivator, and the 10th level is only for invincible Emperor Realm cultivators and half-saints." Xiaoyu explained in a low voice. Zhuowen nodded in understanding. Then he stared at Lung Quan and asked, "May I know which level is Senior Lung Quan on?" Lung Quan smirked and said proudly, "I'm not talented. I'm on the 10th level." "Haha, looks like you've made a breakthrough. I wonder what kind of law you've comprehended." Xiaoyu's eyes flickered and smiled. Hearing Xiaoyu's praise, Lung Quan's smile grew wider. He said proudly, "I'm not talented. Water law. Not bad. Looks like the martial sage has taken in a good disciple. I'm afraid it won't be long before you become a half-sage," Xiaoyu said with a faint smile. Lung Quan didn't reply. He merely stared at Zhuowen and spoke. "Actually, junior brother Zhuowen isn't bad either. Being able to reach the 7th level of the Immortal Emperor Realm, you aren't weak at all. Although you are still a distance away from being invincible, if you work hard, there's still hope." Lung Quan's words carried a hint of arrogance. Xiaoyu frowned slightly when he heard it, slightly displeased. However, Zhuowen was neither sad nor happy. His eyes were full of calmness as he said indifferently, "Senior brother Lung Quan, have you agreed? Didn't you say that you would let me try?" Who knows, I might accidentally enter the 10th floor. Hearing this, Lung Quan's expression turned slightly sluggish. Soon after, he sneered and said, Junior brother Zhuowen, please follow me. I will tell you the conditions to enter the next level. As he spoke, Lung Quan led the way. Soon, the three of them arrived at the central area. The martial saint's statue was still standing there, and there were many people below. They were all disciples of the martial saint tower. Senior brother Lung Quan. Lung Quan and the two of them naturally attracted the attention of many disciples. They all greeted them respectfully. Lung Quan nodded slightly. He came to the front of the statue and bent down slightly. Soon after, he stretched out his right hand and pressed it against the bottom of the statue. Instantly, the statue came to life, and its huge body began to move. Junior brother Zhuowen, you only need to defeat this statue, and you will be qualified to enter the 2nd floor. The rules are roughly as follows, Lung Quan said indifferently. I see. Then I will give it a try. Zhuowen nodded slightly. He took a step forward and condensed celestial energy in his hand, turning it into a milky white color. Then in an instant, he appeared in front of the statue and struck out with his right hand. The statue was not to be outdone. Its huge palm, which was the size of a cattail leaf fan, fell from the sky and landed on Zhuowen's head. It wanted to completely annihilate him. Break! Zhuowen's right hand clenched into a fist. Celestial energy surged out and blasted on the statue's palm. After a loud explosion, the statue's palm crumbled inch by inch. Then Zhuowen's body did not change. He took a step to the side and took out the tiger head clear golden spear. With a twist of his palm, the tiger head clear golden spear spun at a high speed like an electric drill and drilled into the statue's body. Zhuowen suddenly flicked the spear. With a loud bang, the statue exploded into countless pieces. It should be fine now, right? Zhuowen withdrew his spear and stood upright, staring at Lung Quan. Lung Quan nodded. He was not surprised. The statue on the 1st floor was only at the 1st level Emperor realm. It was normal for Zhuowen to kill it instantly. You can enter the 2nd floor now. Lung Quan pointed to the front. There was a white light pillar at the place where the statue had shattered. Following Lung Quan's instructions, Zhuowen came to the white light pillar and disappeared into it. After the light pillar disappeared, the broken statue wriggled and returned to its original state. Lung Quan took out a jade talisman and disappeared from the 1st floor with Xiaoyu. Afterwards, Zhuowen went extremely smoothly. He passed through the first 6 levels like a hot knife through butter, all the way until he reached the 7th level. Zhuowen's way of breaking through the floors had attracted the attention of many disciples in the martial saint tower. On the 7th floor, the martial saint statue was still there. Zhuowen stood quietly in front of it, while Lung Quan and Xiaoyu watched him silently. The statue on the 7th floor should be able to give Junior Zhuowen an obstacle. However, he can still pass through it. However, I'm not so sure about the 8th and 9th floor. Lung Quan smiled faintly. Xiaoyu shook his head and didn't reply. He had seen Zhuowen's talent and strength with his own eyes. He felt that Zhuowen could enter the 8th and 9th level. As for the 10th level, that would be somewhat difficult. Roar! The martial saint statue roared and pounced towards Zhuowen again. Zhuowen stood quietly in the same spot. At the instant the statue arrived before him, Zhuowen moved as well. He flicked his spear and suddenly smashed it in front of the statue. After that, the statue's figure instantly froze before shattering. The statue on the 7th floor was destroyed in an instant by Zhuowen. Lung Quan's mouth stiffened. He did not feel anything when Zhuowen killed the statue on the first 6 floors. However, the statue on the 7th floor was at the 7th level Emperor realm, which was the threshold of the advanced level Emperor realm. Zhuowen was only at the 7th level Emperor realm. However, he managed to kill the statue on the 7th floor in an instant. Zhuowen was not ordinary. Looking at the figure that disappeared in the light pillar, Lung Quan frowned slightly. However, he was not too worried. The statue on the 8th floor was much taller than the previous one. Its aura was also much stronger. It was like a small mountain, giving people a strong sense of oppression. Zhuowen took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. At this moment, the statue on the 8th floor moved. The statue on the 8th floor is at the 8th level Emperor realm. It is not comparable to the statue on the 7th floor. I wonder how Zhuowen will deal with it. Lung Quan squinted his eyes. He knew that Zhuowen was not simple. It was possible for him to pass the 8th floor, or even the 9th floor. However, it was impossible for him to pass the 10th floor. Therefore, he was not too worried that Lu Hantian would be found by Zhuowen. 4 kill sword formation. An indifferent voice rang out. Then 4 formation diagrams flew out. Below the formation diagrams were blood-red swords that were filled with terrifying killing intent. The 4 kill sword formation was an origin formation that Zhuowen had modified from the 4 kill formation diagram. He originally had the ultimate sword formation with him. However, it was not of much help to Zhuowen. Therefore, Zhuowen integrated the ultimate sword formation into the 4 kill formation diagram. Thus, it became the 4 kill sword formation. Its power was much stronger than before. Once the 4 kill sword formation was out, it enveloped the statue. Then, the crowd on the 8th floor was shocked to see that the statue collapsed without making a sound. This is another insta-kill? Lung Quan's face stiffened. He squinted his eyes. Not only him, but the entire 8th floor became quiet. Zhuowen did not care about the crowd. Instead, he took a step forward and entered the light pillar that led to the 9th floor. Soon he disappeared into the light pillar. In comparison, the 9th floor was much quieter. The number of disciples on the 9th floor was also much lesser. When Zhuowen appeared from the light pillar, the disciples who were cultivating on the 9th floor opened their eyes. They stared at Zhuowen, who had just appeared with a hint of surprise in their eyes. Obviously, Zhuowen's face was unfamiliar to them. They had never seen him before. Junior brother who just advanced to the 8th floor? The disciples looked at each other. Soon after, they were surprised to find that Zhuowen did not sit cross-legged and cultivate like them. Instead, he directly rushed towards the statue at the center. What is he doing? Is he going to enter the 10th floor? Is he kidding? When Zhuowen arrived in front of the statue, many disciples on the 9th floor could not remain calm. They stood up one after another and looked at Zhuowen, as if they were looking at an idiot. Whoosh! Whoosh! 2 more figures appeared. Lung Quan and Xiao Yu had also arrived on the 9th floor. Eldest senior brother is here too. Lung Quan's appearance immediately attracted the attention of many disciples on the 9th floor. Especially when they saw Lung Quan walking towards Zhuowen, many disciples knew that Zhuowen was related to Lung Quan. Because of this, many disciples began to pay attention to Zhuowen. Maybe Zhuowen can really enter the 10th floor, Xiao Yu said with a laugh. Lung Quan narrowed his eyes and said indifferently, "It's not that easy to enter the 10th floor. Junior brother Zhuowen has not comprehended the power of law. How can he enter the 10th floor?" Before Lung Quan finished speaking, the temperature on the 9th floor rose sharply. In an instant, it was as if the 9th floor was filled with a sea of fire. In this high temperature, there was a terrifying power of law. The left eye of the young man who was originally standing in front of the statue was extremely red. It was as if there was a raging fire burning in it. The raging fire contained a powerful law of fire. Crack! A crisp shattering sound rang out. The statue on the 9th floor shattered into pieces under everyone's gazes. The moment the statue shattered, a staircase appeared on the 10th floor. Zhuowen did not stop. He walked up the staircase step by step, and disappeared from everyone's sight in the blink of an eye. That's the law of fire. Chapter 1391. Facing Lung Quanxiao, Yu was also surprised as he stared blankly at the figure disappearing into the pillar of light. Soon, the shock on his face was replaced by ecstasy. As expected, Zhuowen has grasped the power of law. In other words, although his cultivation is only at the 7th level of the Great Emperor realm, he possesses the power of law. His strength is not weaker than an invincible Great Emperor master, Xiao Yu said with a laugh. Lung Quan's expression was a little ugly. He said, "Peak Master Xiao Yu, let's enter the 10th floor too." Xiao Yu nodded. Soon after, the two of them disappeared from the 9th floor. The 10th floor was quite spacious. The surroundings were pitch black, and there were specks of light emitting a white light. In this pitch black space, there were 5 huge stone palaces. These 5 stone palaces were floating in the air. Moreover, the height of the 5 stone palaces was different. From the bottom to the top, the stone palace at the top was the most majestic. The pressure it emitted was enough to make one's heart tremble. Zhuowen stood below the void. He raised his head and looked at the 5 stone palaces in the sky. His eyes narrowed slightly. Xiaohei, can you sense Big Brother Hantian's aura? Zhuowen asked in a deep voice. He suspected that Lu Hantian's capture was related to Leng Quan. He's in the first stone palace. If I'm not wrong, that stone palace should belong to Leng Quan, Xiaohei said indifferently. Hearing this, Zhuowen took a step forward and instantly arrived at the first stone palace. However, the stone palace's door was tightly shut. The doors closed. Zhuowen frowned. He snorted coldly and pushed his right hand forward. Surging immortal energy swept out like a swimming dragon. Rumble! The stone door trembled violently, but there was no sign of it breaking. Junior brother Zhuowen, what is the meaning of this? An unfriendly voice sounded. Leng Quan had brought Xiaoyu to the 10th floor. When Leng Quan saw that Zhuowen was actually bombarding the entrance of his house, his gaze became very gloomy. Zhuowen's actions were clearly not placing him in his sights. Zhuowen slowly turned around, looked at Leng Quan behind him, and said indifferently, "Those who come are guests. I think senior brother Leng Quan shouldn't refuse me at the door, right?" Leng Quan's face was gloomy as he coldly said, "Of course." As he spoke, Leng Quan arrived in front of the stone door. Just as he was about to open the stone door, 3 whooshing sounds could be heard. Above the cold spring stone hall, 3 white-haired old men flew out from the other 3 stone halls. These 3 people were full of vigor and vitality. They had white hair and youthful complexions. The aura they contained was also extremely powerful. They were all half-step saints. However, the 3 of them didn't possess any laws. Clearly, they hadn't comprehended any laws before becoming half-saints. Their auras were much weaker than Xiaoyu's. In terms of strength, the 3 of them were at most on par with Leng Quan. After all, there was a huge gap between those who possessed the power of laws and those who did not. Cold Spring, what's going on? Just now, I seem to have heard someone attacking the stone hall. Who is it? An old man in a black robe first glanced at Leng Quan. Then his sharp gaze landed on Zhuowen and Xiaoyu. There was a trace of hostility in his eyes. However, when the old man's attention landed on Xiaoyu, his face froze. Because the pressure Xiaoyu gave him was like a heavy mountain crushing down, causing his heart to beat faster. This person's cultivation was also a half-step saint. Moreover, he was a half-step saint who had grasped the laws. He was an extremely terrifying existence. These 2 are from the Divine Academy. This is the peak master of the mysterious origin peak, Xiaoyu. And this is the direct disciple of the mysterious origin peak, Zhuowen. Leng Quan introduced indifferently. From the Divine Academy, the 3 old men's gazes narrowed as they looked at Zhuowen and Xiaoyu rather cautiously. In the Divine Spectre realm, the Divine Academy was a benchmark. Everyone was afraid of them. So it's people from the Divine Academy. Nice to meet you. The 3 old men did not dare to be negligent as they all cupped their hands toward Xiaoyu. Xiaoyu nodded lightly and smiled at Leng Quan. "Nephew Leng Quan, why don't you invite us in?" Leng Quan smiled faintly. "Of course." As he spoke, Leng Quan opened the door and led the group into the stone hall. During the process of entering, Zhuowen was constantly paying attention to his surroundings. Xiaohei even released her divine sense to help Zhuowen scan the stone hall. In the stone hall, a group of 6 people sat on 2 sides, but Zhuowen's brows were slightly furrowed. In this stone hall, he actually did not sense Lu Hantian's aura at all. Even Xiaohei's enormous divine sense could not detect it. What's going on? Could it be that Big Brother Hantian really wasn't brought back to the Martial Saint Tower? Zhuowen's gaze was piercingly cold as he thought to himself. There are 4 other stone halls on the 10th floor. Since he isn't in Leng Quan's stone hall, he might be in one of the other 4. Xiaohei said lazily. Hearing that, Zhuowen's eyes erupted with a cold light as a terrifying aura burst out from his body. For a moment, the entire hall fell into a strange silence. The 3 old men stared at Zhuowen in astonishment, feeling strange about Zhuowen's abnormal behavior. Senior brother Lung Quan, where is big brother Hantian? If you want any price, I can give it to you as long as you hand over big brother Hantian. Zhuowen slowly raised his head, his left eye burning with flames as a scorching aura filled the entire hall. With those words, the three old men narrowed their eyes as a strange expression appeared on their faces. However, they quickly regained their composure. Xiaoyu glanced at Zhuowen before looking at Lung Quan. Nephew Lung Quan, Zhuowen is right. If your martial Saint Tower has really captured that Lu Hantian, please release him. Our fine theology academy will not take advantage of you. Lung Quan fell silent for a while before suddenly laughing. Martial Uncle Xiaoyu must be joking. Ever since that Lu Hantian took advantage of the young miss of my martial Saint Tower, he fled. I don't even know where he is right now. Took advantage? Big brother Hantian is not that kind of person. Someone from your martial Saint Tower must have framed him, right? Zhuowen slowly stood up as the flames around him burned even more vigorously. The fiery red in his left eye burned even more fiercely as the laws of fire surged out, filling his entire body. Sensing the terrifying laws of fire, the faces of Lung Quan and the three old men sank. Junior brother Zhuowen, what's the meaning of this? Could it be that you want to break the rules and fight within the martial Saint Tower? Lung Quan coldly shouted. Peak Master Xiaoyu, you better control your disciple. Could it be that your fine theology academy wants to use its power to oppress others? The black-robed old man coldly said. Xiaoyu turned his head and muttered to himself. It's been a long time since I've moved around. Today I'll accompany Zhuowen to go crazy. It'll be better if you hand over that Lu Hantian. Otherwise, I really don't know what I'll do. As he spoke, Xiaoyu grinned as a pillar of fire surged out from under his feet, wrapping around his body. The laws of fire that were even more terrifying than Zhuowen's soared into the sky. Too presumptuous. You actually dare to fight in our martial Saint Tower's territory. Don't blame me for this. Lung Quan's face was extremely ugly. He never thought that Zhuowen and Xiaoyu would be so crazy as to attack without any warning. Lung Quan, the three of us will hold Xiaoyu back. You go and capture Zhuowen. At that time, Xiaoyu won't dare to act rashly. The black-robed old man suddenly said to Lung Quan, as he took a step forward and flew towards Xiaoyu. Boom! Boom! In an instant, the three old men and Xiaoyu clashed. For terrifying attacks surged up like an avalanche. Although the three old men of the martial Saint Tower were half-step saints, they had not comprehended the laws of Saint Runes. Therefore, their battle strength was much weaker than Xiaoyu's. Even if the three of them joined forces, they were still at a disadvantage against Xiaoyu. However, they still managed to stop Xiaoyu. Junior brother Zhuowen, I originally didn't want to fight you. However, you've gone too far. So don't blame me. Lung Quan glanced at the battle between Xiaoyu and the three old men, then walked towards Zhuowen. Around Lung Quan's body, surges of the power of laws rolled and surged like waves. Boom! Suddenly, Zhuowen realized that under Lung Quan's feet, it was no longer the ground of the stone hall, but a vast ocean. Behind Lung Quan, waves of 10,000 feet tall swept out violently. In an instant, the peaceful stone hall had turned into a raging ocean. The law of water? Surrounded by countless flames, Zhuowen slowly raised his head. His fiery red left eye revealed a trace of demonic brilliance. Lung Quan stood proudly and looked down at Zhuowen. His eyes were filled with arrogance. Although Zhuowen also possessed the law of fire, his cultivation was only at the 7th level Emperor realm. Although he could be called an invincible Emperor Lord, he was much weaker than a 9th level Emperor realm invincible Emperor Lord. Of course, if Zhuowen had mastered a powerful law, even if he was at the 7th level Emperor realm, Lung Quan would not dare to underestimate him. Zhuowen stretched out his right hand and immediately took out the tiger head clear golden spear. Then, the surrounding flames turned into a huge fire dragon. Riding the wind and breaking the waves, it suddenly rushed towards Lung Quan. Lung Quan was not afraid. He stomped his foot, and suddenly, huge waves fell from behind him. They were densely packed, like a mountain of waves, rumbling as they sank. Boom! The fire dragon and the huge waves collided, and then there was a strange hissing sound. Between the two, Wisps of white mist rose, blocking one's vision. Swoosh! There was the sound of something breaking through the air. And a figure suddenly emerged from the white mist. Like an arrow, he shot out and instantly appeared in front of Lung Quan. Die! A long spear surrounded by flames shot towards Lung Quan's forehead. Lung Quan snorted and took a few steps back. He clenched his right hand, and the law of water condensed into an icy blue trident. Ding! The trident was in front of him, blocking the attack of the long spear. Then, there was a crisp sound of collision. Dang! 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 Both Lung Quan and Zhuowen took a few steps back at the same time. Both of them narrowed their eyes at the same time, realizing that the other party was difficult to deal with. You have some strength, but I won't hold back this time. Don't blame me if I accidentally kill you. Lung Quan's eyes became gloomy. He took a step forward, and the law of water began to condense. A ray of light shot out from his forehead and shot into the law of water. In the end, a huge strange beast that was thousands of feet tall appeared in front of Zhuowen. Chapter 1392. Kuei Ox. The beast was shaped like an ox. It had a gray body and no horns. Its single foot would cause wind and rain wherever it went. Its light was like the sun and moon, and its voice was like thunder. Its name was Kuei. My armor soul Kuei Ox, Lung Quan said nonchalantly. With that, the Kuei Ox immediately roared. Its huge body summoned the wind and rain as it stepped through the air. Rumble! Terrifying lightning descended from the sky and landed around the Kuei Ox. It was like a god of lightning had descended. It was extremely terrifying. Lung Quan's armor soul, Kuei Ox, combined with his laws of water was flawless. Its power was multiplied, like the might of the heavens. The Kuei Ox landed beside Lung Quan. It lowered its body and let out a respectful roar, as if it was pleading with Lung Quan. Lung Quan mounted the Kuei Ox and looked down at Zhuowen from above. He said nonchalantly, Junior Zhuowen, you're no match for me. I advise you to give up now, and I can let you leave the Martial Saint Tower. Zhuowen raised his head slightly and stared at Lung Quan. His lips were filled with mockery as he said, You have an armor soul. Do you think I don't? As he spoke, a clear and melodious dragon roar burst out from Zhuowen's body. Afterwards, a black dragon leapt out from the void behind Zhuowen. Dragon scales that were as black as ink covered its entire body, emitting a white light. Its pair of dark golden dragon eyes were suffused with a frightening brilliance. In particular, the pressure that was emitted from its dragon body was so terrifying that it was as if the heavens and earth were collapsing. A dragon soul? Lung Quan's face froze. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the colossal black dragon. He could not help but cry out, Xiao He, go! Zhuowen roared furiously. He leapt into the air and arrived at the black dragon's head. The flames in his left eye burned even brighter. Extremely terrifying laws of fire interwove in his pupil. In an instant, the laws of fire revolved around the black dragon, causing it to turn into a terrifying dragon of flames. Roar! Xiao He roared at the sky. Its might reached the limit, as it was enveloped by the laws of fire. So what if you have a dragon soul? Your cultivation is weaker than mine. I don't believe that you are my match. Lung Quan regained his composure. With a stomp of his foot, the Kuei cow under his feet was wrapped in monstrous thunderbolts and terrifying tsunamis as it surged through the air. Boom! Boom! In an instant, the two beasts collided violently in the sky. Terrifying beastly roars reverberated continuously, piercing through metal and rocks. The two beasts were simply too huge. The shockwaves from their battle were even more terrifying. The entire 10th floor of the Martial Saint Tower shook violently. The tremors even spread to the lower 9 floors of the Martial Saint Tower, causing many disciples to feel fear and suspicion. Your disciple actually has a dragon soul. The 3 elders of the Martial Saint Tower separated from Xiaoyu as soon as they came into contact with each other. Then, they stared at the Kuei Ox and the Sacred Abyss Dragon warily. This was especially true for the Abyss Saint Dragon. Its dragon soul was simply too large, and the aura it emitted made even the 3 half-saints feel insignificant in front of it. The smile on Xiaoyu's face was quite brilliant as he said indifferently, You talk a lot of nonsense. It would have been better if you had taken out Lu Hantian earlier. Now that things have turned out like this, you are just asking for trouble. Hearing this, the three elders fumed. Xiao Yu was simply unreasonable. How dare he put all the blame on them? However, when they recalled Xiao Yu's nickname of Madman Xiao in the inner courtyard, the three elders knew that it was useless to say anything more. They could only fight. You underestimate Lung Quan too much. His cultivation is at the 9th level of the martial emperor realm. He has comprehended the laws of water, and has become an invincible martial emperor. He is much stronger than Zhuowen. When the time comes, Zhuowen will suffer a crushing defeat. The three elders snorted coldly and split into 3 different directions, attacking Xiao Yu from both sides. Xiao Yu smiled coldly and said, "Underestimating Lung Quan? It's clearly you guys who have underestimated Zhuowen." As he spoke, flames burst out from Xiao Yu's body, forming a firestorm. He controlled the laws of fire, and shuttled through the firestorm like the ruler of fire. It was extremely terrifying. Fight! The moment Xiao He and the Kuei collided, Zhuowen leaped up, holding the tiger head clear golden spear, and circulating the immortal energy in his body. Billowing milky white immortal energy spread from the body of the spear to the tip. It was as powerful as a tiger, and as imposing as a rainbow. Lung Quan's eyes were dark and cold. He was stern and fearless as he gripped the trident in his hand. Waves of blue water surrounded the trident as Lung Quan shot out like an arrow that had been released from a bow. Tsunamis raged wherever he passed. Boom! Flames and water collided, exploding into a dazzling light. White mist rose and turned into a white dragon. Bang bang bang! The two of them continued to exchange blows. The sound of metal clashing resounded in the void like drums and gongs. The ear-piercing voice was like a magical temptation, as it spread out in layers. The disciples of the martial Saint Tower covered their ears with their hands after hearing the voice, as their hearts were filled with fear. What's going on? What's going on in the martial Saint Tower? That was what the disciples of the martial Saint Tower were thinking. No, the martial Saint Tower is shaking too violently. I have to get out, get out. Finally, some of the disciples could not stand the aftermath of the battle, and left the martial Saint Tower. They came to the barren land in front of the martial Saint Tower. More and more disciples came out. In the end, even the elite disciples of the 9th level of the martial Saint Tower were forced to leave the 9th level of the martial Saint Tower. Even the senior brothers of the 9th level have come out. Could it be that something is happening on the 10th level? What's going on there? When the elite disciples of the 9th level came out, the other disciples gathered on the barren land had strange looks on their faces. The martial Saint Tower continued to tremble, as if it was going to collapse at any moment. Many disciples of the martial Saint Tower were shocked to the core. Rumble! A thunderous sound came from the 10th level of the martial Saint Tower, attracting the attention of all the disciples on the barren land. Then, the disciples were shocked to see that the walls of the 10th level of the martial Saint Tower were starting to crack. The cracks were getting bigger and bigger. Crack! Finally, after a clear and crisp sound, the wall finally shattered and collapsed. A strange beast that was several thousand feet long flew out from the crack and crashed into the ground. The beast was extremely terrifying. Its body was accompanied by bolts of lightning, as if the god of thunder had descended to the mortal world. That's First Senior Brother's armored soul Kuei Cao? When the gazes of the disciples of the martial Saint Tower landed on the body of the beast, their faces stiffened as they recognized the identity of the beast. The reason why their faces had stiffened was mainly because the Kuei Cao appeared to be in a somewhat miserable state at this moment. It was as if it had been sent flying by someone. Roar! When the Kuei Cao was sent flying, a terrifying flame burst out from the crack of the 10th level. Following closely behind the flames was a terrifyingly huge fire dragon that was over 10,000 feet long. The huge dragon's body was like a dark cloud that covered the sky and the sun. The flames burning on its surface were like sunlight that illuminated the earth. Boom! 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 The fire dragon flew out and instantly hit the Kuei Cao. The two huge beasts fought each other. In the sky, countless flames fell from the sky as the two beasts fought. The power was terrifying, as if the end of the world had arrived. Many of the cultivators on the barren land did not dare to touch the falling flames. Instead, they hid far away. Ah, save me. A wisp of flame fell from the sky and landed right where the 3 cultivators at the back were. Instantly, a single spark started a prairie fire. The moment the 3 of them came into contact with the flame, they only had time to scream before they were burned into nothingness. Hiss! Hiss! Run! The flame is formed by the law of fire. It's not something that we can touch. We'll die if we touch it. That scene was deeply imprinted in the minds of the other disciples. After that, all of them ran for their lives, leaving the area where the 2 huge beasts were fighting. The battle between the 2 huge beasts was too violent. It was not something that they could withstand. Even the elite disciples of the 9th Heaven Emperor realm had to retreat. What's that fire dragon? Could it be someone's armor soul? Why is it so huge? After running far enough away, the disciples of the Martial Saint Tower stopped to watch. Some of them even started to have doubts about the huge fire dragon. Whose armor soul was this fire dragon? Boom! Another violent muffled sound rang out as 4 figures shot out from the crack on the 10th floor. The 4 figures flew out as they fought. Terrifying energy was like firecrackers that kept ringing out. Those are the 3 elders. Who's the other one? The 3 elders seemed to be working together to deal with that person. Everyone burst into an uproar when they saw the 4 people who had rushed out. The 3 elders were all at the Bansheng level. However, they were unable to gain the upper hand, even when they joined forces to deal with one person. It was simply too unbelievable. That person should be a sage to be who has mastered the law of fire. I've seen him before. He seems to be one of the peak masters of the Divine Academy. I didn't expect him to come to our Martial Saint Tower to cause trouble. Suddenly, an indignant voice came from the crowd. Many people were angry as they thought that Xiaoyu was here to cause trouble. Boom! Not long after the crowd finished speaking, another 2 figures flew out from the crack. Boom! 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 The battle between the 2 was even more intense. One of them was surrounded by the law of fire, while the other was surrounded by the law of water. The flames and the sea were like 2 dividing lines that stretched across the void. Every time they clashed, it would create an overbearing white mist. Ding! The sound of metal clashing could be heard. Then, the 2 figures that were fighting each other separated upon contact, and both of them retreated a few hundred steps. Roar! The fire dragon shot out and landed in front of Zhuowen. It caught Zhuowen's flying body and carried it on its body. The Kuei cow was wrapped in endless lightning as it stepped on the air. It raised its head and caught Leng Quan. Senior brother Leng Quan, didn't you say that I'm not your match? Now that we've fought for almost 100 rounds, you don't seem to have taken me down? Zhuowen said sarcastically as he stared at Leng Quan with his spear in his right hand. Chapter 1393. Too merciless. Who's that young man? He's able to fight on par with first senior brother. Isn't that unbelievable? Besides, his aura is only at the 7th layer martial monarch realm, but he has mastered the rules of fire. How talented! In the distance, many disciples of the martial sacred tower were attracted by Zhuowen, who was standing on the fiery dragon. They began to discuss among themselves while guessing his strength. He actually failed to take down Zhuowen in front of so many junior brothers, and he instantly felt that he had lost face. Most importantly, Zhuowen's cultivation was 2 levels lower than his. Even if Zhuowen also grasped the power of laws, logically speaking, Zhuowen should be slightly stronger. Junior brother Zhuowen, you forced me to do this. Leng Quan's eyes were extremely cold. After saying this, the trident in his right hand slowly crumbled and turned into the rules of water before vanishing into thin air. Misty rain. Leng Quan reached out his right hand with his palm facing upwards. The surrounding ocean began to boil and surge upward like an upside-down waterfall. It was extremely terrifying. More water surged upward and eventually formed the shape of a bowl. Following this, Leng Quan let out a groan, causing the water bowl to collapse. Drip, drip, drip. Instantly, tiny droplets of water that were as thin as silk dripped down from the sky. The misty water droplets descended and formed a misty mist, giving it an ethereal feel. The water droplets covered a huge area, almost reaching a few hundred zhang. Zhuowen was right at the center of the misty rain domain. Such a heavy pressure. Within the misty domain, Zhuowen frowned slightly. He actually felt a heavy pressure acting on his body. The pressure was extremely terrifying. It felt like it was going to crush him completely. His movements slowed down slightly, making it difficult for him to move. That's the misty rain domain, first senior brother's ultimate skill. It's a domain constructed with the rules of water. Within the misty rain domain, eldest senior brother is the absolute overlord. I'm afraid this person is finished. Looking at the misty rain, many disciples of the martial Saint Tower were shocked. They never thought that Lung Quan would use such a powerful move against Zhuowen. From this, it could be seen how much pressure this Zhuowen gave Lung Quan. Whoosh! Whoosh! Numerous sonic booms resounded within the misty rain. Soon after, Zhuowen's pupils shrunk slightly as he discovered that the surrounding thin and long raindrops were like countless hidden weapons that rushed towards the fatal spots on Zhuowen's body. 7 Emotions Precious Seal. Zhuowen did not hesitate to use the 7 Emotions Treasured Seal. With the 3 Great Amplification Treasured Seals, Zhuowen's strength increased by several times. At the same time, a pair of enormous purple lightning wings sprouted from Zhuowen's back. The lightning wings unfurled, and Zhuowen disappeared from the spot as though he had teleported. Whoosh! 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 When Zhuowen appeared again, he was already at the edge of the misty rain domain. However, just as he was about to step out of the domain, an invisible barrier blocked his path, causing him to retreat repeatedly. Zhuowen, it's useless. The misty rain domain is completely sealed. There's no way you can escape. Lung Quan, who was at the center of the domain, had a sneer on his face. Behind him, the Kuei cow roared as it charged through the air with the intention of completely tearing Zhuowen apart. Xiaohei! Zhuowen exclaimed. Immediately, Xiaohei's massive dragon body leaped up and clashed with Kuei once again. However, this time, the two of them were in the misty rain domain. Here, Kuei's strength was greatly increased, while Xiaohei was suppressed. Therefore, in the battle between the two, Xiaohei was the one who was suppressed by Kuei. Junior brother Zhuowen, I gave you a chance in the past. Unfortunately, you didn't cherish it. It's too late to regret it now. Lung Quan sneered. Accompanied by the misty rain, his figure flickered like a ghost. So, in a blink of an eye, Lung Quan had teleported in front of Zhuowen. Zhuowen suddenly twisted his body as he raised the tiger head clear gold spear in his hand. However, Lung Quan sneered and vanished in front of him. His spear missed. So, another sonic boom tore through the air. Lung Quan had already appeared behind Zhuowen. At the instant, he struck out with his spear. With a hideous smile, he slammed his right palm onto Zhuowen's back. Zhuowen seemed to sense it as the purple lightning wings on his back closed. A terrifying purple lightning emanated and blocked Lung Quan's strike. Dang! 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 Under the terrifying palm strike, Zhuowen grunted as he retreated a few steps back. His brows were tightly knitted together. In the misty rain domain, Lung Quan's speed was nearly at the level of teleportation. Even with his lightning wings, his speed was still inferior to the latter. Zhuowen, where are you looking? Your purple lightning wings are not bad. To think that your speed is so fast. It should be more suitable for me. Lung Quan's voice sounded in Zhuowen's ears once again. Following that, Zhuowen realized that on his left, Lung Quan was charging over with a hideous smile. He pushed out his right palm, as a terrifying force surged over like a swimming dragon. Void! Zhuowen's eyes turned misty. Following that, a void force surged out from his body. This void force emanated, causing Lung Quan's actions to immediately slow down. 4 Kill Sword Array. Before Lung Quan could even react, he was enveloped by the 4 Kill Sword Array. The corroding forces were like countless blades that squeezed towards Lung Quan in a bid to mince him. Bang! 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 Lung Quan's eyes were cold as the water laws constantly revolved around him to resist the surrounding corroding forces. Following that, he raised his hands as the water laws soared into the sky like a gigantic dragon. Boom! The 4 kills sword array was blasted apart as Lung Quan suddenly emerged. He surveyed his surroundings in a bid to find Zhuowen's figure. Soon, he saw Zhuowen floating in midair on his left. He saw Zhuowen extend his right hand as a seal flashed in his palm. A dragon's roar emanated out. Heavenly Dragon Lock Seal. Clang! Immediately, thick black chains shot out from Zhuowen's right palm. These chains were extremely fast. Before Lung Quan could even react, he was bound by layers of chains. Darn it, what is this? Lung Quan's pupils constricted to the size of needles, as he could not help but roar. The chains were just too tough and terrifying. They bound him tightly, making it impossible for him to escape. Die! Zhuowen ignored Lung Quan's roar as he stepped through the void. The tiger head clear gold spear in his hand emitted a monstrous tiger's roar as it instantly appeared in front of Lung Quan. Following that, his right hand pressed against the end of the spear. So, the tiger head clear gold spear transformed into a massive tiger as it descended from the sky, heading straight for Lung Quan's vitals. Do you think it's possible to kill me in my Misty Rain domain? Lung Quan's eyes were cold. Immediately, the surrounding misty rain churned and gathered in front of him, forming a circular shield. Ding! The tiger head clear gold spear instantly arrived, before emitting a metallic clang. It was unable to advance any further. Humph! Break it! Lung Quan roared as the surrounding misty rain forces drilled into his body. It caused Lung Quan's strength to multiply at a discernible rate as he grew stronger. Clang! The heavenly dragon lock seal was shattered by Lung Quan. As for Lung Quan, he stepped through the air and grabbed the trident with his right hand. Like an arrow he shot it out. Grand Slaughter Dragon Seal. Zhuowen's eyes were extremely calm as a sanguine aura spewed out from his acupuncture points. Immediately, a massive blood-colored dragon appeared above his head. It was the phantom of the Grand Slaughter Sacred Dragon. The phantom of the Grand Slaughter Sacred Dragon lingered above Zhuowen's head for a moment before it drilled into the top of his head. Following that, Zhuowen's body began emitting a blazing blood beam. The surface of Zhuowen's body was covered in traces of blood-red imprints. His limbs, body, and face were all covered in blood-red imprints. Even in his eyes, there was a small blood-red dragon that was rolling about. I wonder what kind of power the Grand Slaughter Dragon Seal and fire I can produce. Zhuowen muttered softly as he took a step into the void. The purple lightning wings on his back blasted out bolts of lightning that surged into the sky. As for Zhuowen, he appeared in front of Lung Quan as though he had teleported. With the Misty Rain domain augmenting me, my strength has increased by several times, or even dozens of times. Yet, you still dare to fight me head-on. You are courting death. Seeing Zhuowen advancing instead of retreating, Lung Quan laughed out loud. The corners of his mouth were filled with mockery. When he approached Zhuowen, he suddenly punched out, causing countless water vortexes to form in the surrounding space. Courting death? Perhaps. Zhuowen did not say much as he punched out as well. The wind from his fist howled, faintly containing the terrifying roar of a dragon and tiger. There was also the ear-piercing sound of tearing cloth. Boom! The instant the two fists collided in the void, a monstrous dragon roar accompanied by the ear-piercing sound of water spread out in the surrounding space. The thunderous collision grew louder and louder, more and more ear-piercing. It caused many disciples on the desolate grounds to cover their ears as they revealed looks of pain. Too merciless. Amidst the ear-piercing explosion, an indifferent voice soared into the clouds, reverberating in the void like a great bell. Immediately, the dragon roar grew louder and louder. Above the void, the phantom of the Taisha Sacred Dragon appeared once again. It stretched across the void and soared into the sky. Ka-cha! A crisp sound rang out. Immediately after, all the disciples of the Martial Saint Tower were horrified to discover that cracks had appeared in Lung Quan's Misty Rain domain under the bombardment of the Taisha Sacred Dragon's phantom. Furthermore, the range of the cracks grew larger and larger, eventually enveloping the entire domain. Boom! A dull thunder-like sound rang out as the domain completely collapsed. The moment the domain shattered, all the disciples of the Martial Saint Tower on the desolate grounds looked up. Following that, they were shocked to discover that Zhuowen and Lung Quan were still floating in the air, facing each other. Their right fists were tightly pressed together, maintaining their attacking posture. Who won? What happened just now? Many disciples were at a loss. They didn't know what had just happened. Even Xiao Yu and the three elders of the martial saint tower, who were fighting fiercely, had stopped. They all looked up and stared at the void where Zhuowen and Leng Quan were. They were also waiting for the outcome of the battle between the two. Pfft! A mouthful of blood fell from the sky. The sneer on Leng Quan's face gradually froze, becoming extremely ugly. The bloodstain at the corner of his mouth was a ghastly sight. Chapter 1394. Martial Sacred Realm. Cough cough cough. Leng Quan stared at Zhuowen while coughing continuously. Fresh blood was spat out from his mouth as he fell backward. How is this possible? Did I just lose to you? While falling, Leng Quan raised his head and stared at the young man who was staring at him with a cold gaze. His heart was filled with despair. First senior brother lost? On the desolate ground, many disciples of the martial saint tower were stunned at this moment. Their gazes shifted upwards and landed on the figure that was falling down like a meteor. They were unable to shift their gazes away for a long time. Bang! When Leng Quan's body landed on the ground, the disciples of the martial sacred tower finally recovered from their shock. The disciples who were initially in disbelief glanced at Leng Quan's body on the ground once again. They finally collected their thoughts and believed that Leng Quan had indeed lost the battle. Meanwhile, as Leng Quan was defeated, the Kuei cow's strength was greatly weakened. Xiao He took advantage of the gap and swung its tail, slamming it heavily onto the ground. Awa! The Kuei cow uttered a cry, before it turned into a black ray and entered Leng Quan's forehead. Shush! Zhuowen suddenly fell like a meteor, smashing into the ground and arriving at the crater where Leng Quan was. At that instant, Leng Quan's condition was not too good. His face was as pale as snow, and there was a shocking trail of blood at the corner of his mouth. It was obvious that he had suffered serious injuries from the previous clash. Zhuowen's condition was slightly weak too. His face was slightly pale, but as soon as he struck Leng Quan down, he immediately took out a snow lotus lustrous pill and threw it into his mouth, suppressing the injuries on his body. Inside the deep pit, Leng Quan kept struggling, trying to get up. He glared at Zhuowen. Bang! Zhuowen raised his leg and stomped on Leng Quan's chest, before he said in a calm tone, "Where is the Lu Hantian that you've captured?" Leng Quan spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were filled with frustration. Now that Zhuowen was stepping on him, it was simply too humiliating. Furthermore, it was in front of so many disciples of the martial saint tower. As the first senior brother of the martial sacred tower, he had completely lost his face today. Whoosh! Zhuowen's actions immediately caused an uproar among the disciples of the martial saint tower. Their martial saint tower's strongest disciple, Leng Quan, was now being trampled under someone's foot. Furthermore, this person's cultivation was lower than Leng Quan's. I heard that the two of them were from the Divine Institute. That young man must be a student of the Divine Institute as well. How could he be so strong? Discussions broke out in the surroundings, but no one dared to step forward to help Leng Quan. After all, even Leng Quan was no match for Zhuowen. They would only be courting death if they went up against him. Bastard! Peak Lord Xiaoyu, is your divine college here to cause trouble? Our martial saint tower may not be as strong as your divine institute, but we can't let you bully us like this. The three elders of the martial saint tower were furious. They wanted to pounce forward to stop Zhuowen, but they were stopped by Xiaoyu. I say, you three old fogies shouldn't slander us. Zhuowen and I are not here to cause trouble for the martial saint tower. We're here to ask for someone. Don't you understand? Xiaoyu was helpless as he continued. But you guys don't want to hand it over. What else can I do? I can only use force. Looking at Xiaoyu's actions, the three elders of the martial saint tower were furious. However, there was nothing they could do. They were no match for Xiaoyu. Leng Quan spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were filled with shock and anger as he glared at Zhuowen. He wanted to get up, but he was pinned down by Zhuowen's foot. What are you trying to do? Leng Quan roared. Zhuowen waved his right hand and grabbed Leng Quan. He lifted him up and said indifferently, My request is not high. Just tell me where Big Brother Hantian is. Lung Quan's eyes flickered as he said, I've said it many times. Lu Hantian is not in the Marshal Saint Tower. Even if you kill me, I won't know. Is that so? If that's the case, then you can die. Zhuowen's eyes were still calm, so calm that it was terrifying. After he finished speaking, the long spear in his hand shot towards Lung Quan's forehead, like a venomous snake. The tip of the spear emitted a terrifying white light as it tore through the air, producing a strange hissing sound. Seeing the tip of the spear getting closer and closer, Lung Quan's pupils shrank to the size of needles. His body trembled with fear. He never thought that Zhuowen would really kill him. Moreover, he would kill him in the Marshal Saint Tower, in front of so many junior brothers. I said, don't kill me. When the tip of the spear was only a few millimeters away from Lung Quan's forehead, Lung Quan shouted. In the face of death, Lung Quan finally gave in. He had cultivated to become an invincible martial emperor with great difficulty. He could not die like this. Swoosh! The tip of the spear stopped. A cherry-red wound appeared on Lung Quan's forehead. If the tip of the spear had moved a little further, it would have pierced through Lung Quan's forehead. Feeling the sharpness of the tip of the spear and the faint pain from his forehead, Lung Quan felt his legs go weak despite his strong will. Speak, Zhuowen said indifferently as he looked down at Lung Quan with the spear in his hand. That Lu Hantian is in. Lung Quan's eyes darkened. Just as he was about to speak, a terrifying sonic boom exploded in the air. It was like the nine heavens' profound thunder, reverberating in the void. Immediately after, a stalwart figure flew out from the crack in the 10th floor. The figure was tall and had a handsome face. His eyes were as black as ink, and he looked extremely dashing. What caught everyone's attention was the aura emitted from his body. It was as deep as an abyss, extremely terrifying. His long hair danced wildly under the influence of the aura. It's the Martial Sacred. The Martial Sacred has come out from seclusion. As soon as the stalwart figure appeared, the disciples of the Martial Sacred Tower cheered. The three elders of the Martial Sacred Tower were overjoyed as they rushed to the Martial Sacred's side. The Martial Sacred scanned his surroundings and saw the depressing scene. It was obvious that a great battle had taken place. What exactly happened? The Martial Saint frowned slightly, feeling somewhat displeased. His gaze naturally landed on Lung Quan, who was being held in Zhuowen's hand, as his eyes narrowed into slits. Martial Sacred, this is what happened. The three elders of the Martial Sacred Tower began to explain the sequence of events. Of course, most of them were trying to belittle Xiao Yu and Zhuowen. After hearing the explanation, the Martial Sacred glanced at Xiao Yu and said, Peak Leader Xiao Yu, what is the meaning of this? Are you here to cause trouble at the Martial Sacred Tower? Xiao Yu's eyes glistened as he said, That's not it. We're here to ask for a person from the Martial Sacred Tower. However, your first disciple Lung Quan has been evading our request, which is why the situation has come to this. A person? Who do you want? The Martial Sacred said coldly, Lu Hantian. Zhuowen calmly replied, You're talking about Lu Hantian? The Martial Sacred's eyes suddenly glistened as his aura turned ferocious. He said in a cold tone, Lu Hantian, such a frivolous person, is indeed in the Martial Sacred Tower. Frivolous person? Senior Martial Sacred, please don't slander us. I'm well aware of Brother Hantian's character. Besides, what exactly happened? Zhuowen said with a cold gaze. The Martial Sacred harumphed and said, It seems like you don't know anything. That Lu Hantian did join the Martial Sacred Tower previously, and his talent is not bad. I did have high hopes for him in the past. However, this Lu Hantian has the ambition of a wolf. I don't know where he got the insect corpse pill from, but he used it on my daughter Ruliu. If I don't kill him, I won't be able to get rid of the hatred in my heart. It's the insect corpse pill? Zhuowen's eyes widened as he mumbled to himself. He had heard of the insect corpse pill before. It was said that this pill was made from living insect corpses as the main ingredient, and mixed with other supplementary ingredients. Once the insect corpse pill was consumed, the insect corpses inside the pill would come out and enter the body. Moreover, The insect corpse pill loved the flesh of the human body the most, and it especially loved the brain. Normally, a cultivator who consumed the insect corpse pill would become an idiot or a vegetable within a month. Furthermore, as time passed, the cultivator's body with the insect corpses would slowly be eaten away. In the end, the cultivator's body would turn into an empty shell and become nourishment for the insect corpses. It could be said that the insect corpse pill was an extremely sinister and vicious pill. It was something that would cause people's expressions to change. Do you think that I can spare such a despicable person? Even if it's your divine academy, don't even think about getting that Lu Hantian away today. He will die without a doubt. The martial sacred's voice became somewhat sinister as his veins popped out. Zhuowen frowned as he raised the cold spring and said, "Your disciple is in my hands. If you don't want him to die, I think it's better for you to hand over Lu Hantian." The martial sacred's expression turned sluggish as he stared at the cold spring in Zhuowen's hand. He clenched his fists and coldly said to Xiaoyu, "Peak Master Xiaoyu, does your divine academy really plan to fall out with the martial sacred tower? Although your divine academy has 3 saints in the divine specter realm, saints are not allowed to interfere in the competition between the divine specter realm's local powers. Even if my divine martial sacred tower is not as strong as your divine academy, we will not easily compromise." Xiaoyu frowned and did not reply. His gaze fell on Zhuowen, as if he was asking for Zhuowen's opinion. "I don't know if it's appropriate to compromise or not. I only know that if you don't take out Big Brother Hantian, this cold spring will die." As he spoke, Zhuowen held the cold spring in his right hand and the long spear in his left hand. The tip of the spear was pointed at the cold spring's vitals, as if it could pierce through the cold spring at any moment. "No, Master, save me." Lung Quan trembled, his face was as white as snow. The fear of death had caused him to speak incoherently. "You bastard." The martial sacred was so angry that his entire body was trembling. It was rare for him to hesitate. Lung Quan was the #1 genius of the divine martial sacred tower that he had painstakingly nurtured. Furthermore, he was an invincible emperor lord. He had poured a lot of effort into him. Naturally, he was unwilling to let Lung Quan fall. "Hand over Lu Hantian." Chapter 1395. Joining hands, Master. Lung Quan cried out anxiously, especially when he felt the piercing pain between his eyebrows. The fear in his heart grew even stronger. "Wait," the martial saint shouted. Immediately, Zhuowen's spear, which had continued to penetrate deeper, stopped moving forward. Zhuowen raised his head slightly and stared at the martial saint. He said calmly, "If you don't want him to die, then exchange him with Lu Hantian." The martial saint's face turned ugly. He snorted coldly and took out a communication jade talisman. After sending a message, his gaze fell back onto Zhuowen. "I've already ordered someone to bring Lu Hantian here. Can you put down your spear now?" Hearing this, Zhuowen nodded his head and moved the spear away from Lung Quan's forehead. The latter let out a sigh of relief. "Can you let me go now?" Lung Quan said to Zhuowen with a gloomy face. "Shut up if you don't want to die," Zhuowen said coldly. Lung Quan's face froze. Although he was furious, he did not dare to refute. After all, his life was in Zhuowen's hands. Soon, 3 figures flew out from the 10th floor of the Martial Saint Tower. Among the 3 figures, 2 were wearing golden armor. One was holding a spear, and the other was carrying an axe. They were the 2 disciples of the Martial Saint Tower, who had chased Lu Hantian before. Among the 2, there was a man who was staggering. Under the 2's restraint, he looked weak and was covered in injuries. Zhuo Wen's eyes blazed as he looked at the 2 people who were holding him captive. His body trembled. This person who was covered in wounds was none other than Lu Hantian. Martial Saint. The 2 disciples wearing golden armor came before the Martial Saint and bowed respectfully. Their eyes were filled with doubt. They were curious. Why did the Martial Saint suddenly summon them? The Martial Saint ignored the 2 disciples. He glanced down at Zhuowen and said calmly, "I've brought Lu Hantian here. I believe you should let go of Lung Quan now." After hearing the Martial Saint's words, The two disciples realized that their senior brother of the martial saint tower, Lung Quan, was being held by an unfamiliar young man like a chick. Senior brother Lung Quan? Who is that young man? Did he defeat senior brother Lung? The two disciples exchanged glances with each other. Their hearts were filled with astonishment. From the conversation between Zhuowen and the martial saint, it seemed like this young man was here to find Lu Hantian. Zhuowen. The originally weak Lu Hantian opened his eyes slightly and instantly noticed Zhuowen below him. He couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Is he a friend of Lu Hantian? The pupils of the two disciples shrank, and a strange feeling arose in their hearts. Big brother Hantian, wait for me. I'll save you in a moment. Zhuowen smiled at Lu Hantian, then stared coldly at the martial saint and said, Senior martial saint, how about we hand over our hostages at the same time? The martial saint's eyes flickered as he nodded and said, Sure. Saying this, the two of them tacitly pushed out their hostages. Soon the exchange was completed. After receiving Lu Hantian, Zhuowen did not hesitate. He cupped his fists at the martial saint and said, Senior martial saint, I won't disturb you any longer. Farewell. After saying this, Zhuowen exchanged glances with Xiaoyu, and a pair of purple lightning wings appeared on his back. With a rumble of thunder, Zhuo Wenhua turned into a purple shadow and disappeared from the spot with Lu Hantian. Xiaoyu followed closely behind. He had caused a ruckus at the martial saint tower. To him, this was not a place to stay for long. Once he received Lu Hantian, he naturally prepared to escape. Hehe. After causing a ruckus at my martial saint tower, you're actually planning to leave. Don't you think that this is too cheap? The martial saint was not angry. Instead he laughed. After receiving Lung Quan, he threw out a punch. Instantly, a surge of martial law condensed. Dark clouds gathered in the sky, and within the dark clouds, a gigantic fist of several hundred feet shot out. Rumble! The gigantic fist was like a mountain as it smashed down. It landed on top of Zhuowen's head, wanting to completely shatter him. How terrifying! Feeling the gigantic fist smashing down from the sky, Zhuowen's gaze turned extremely serious. Zhuowen, be careful! Xiaoyu furiously roared as fire law burst out from his body and revolved around his body. Then, he raised his hands and flames turned into a gigantic fire dragon that soared into the sky. Rumble! The fire dragon collided with the fist, and a dull explosion resounded. The surrounding space violently shook. Puchi! Xiaoyu spat out a mouthful of blood. Then, the fire dragon formed by fire law collapsed inch by inch under the fist. Xiaoyu violently retreated, his face as pale as snow. What no one noticed was that when the martial saint launched his attack, and Xiaoyu retreated, a ghostly figure rushed out from the grass not far away at an extremely fast speed. Swoosh! The sound of the air being torn apart rang out. Unknowingly, the ghostly figure had appeared behind Xiaoyu. Then, a palm fiercely landed on Xiaoyu's back. Puchi! Xiaoyu was caught off guard. He did not expect that there would be a sneak attack from behind. He spat out another mouthful of blood and fell forward. Who are you? Xiaoyu was both shocked and furious. Fire law burst out from his body and revolved around him. He turned around and stared at the figure that had launched a sneak attack. That figure did not say anything and attacked again. A wave of black cold chi rushed out like a python and attacked Xiaoyu with a rumbling sound. Rumble! The power of the laws of fire around Xiaoyu had only been hastily set up, so it collapsed under the attack that was ready to be launched. Xiaoyu was like a kite with a broken string. He flew backward and landed heavily on the ground, stirring up layers of dust. Zhuowen's face changed slightly, purple lightning wings unfolded, and he instantly flew to the pit where Xiaoyu was, and helped him up. Old man Xiao, are you alright? Zhuowen asked worriedly. Cough, cough, cough. I'm fine. Xiaoyu coughed a few times. Then he raised his head and stared at the figure that had launched a sneak attack. He gritted his teeth and said, Xian Zhong, I didn't expect it to be you. Not only Zhuowen and Xiaoyu, but the disciples of the martial saint tower and the martial saint were also stunned. They did not expect that someone would appear out of nowhere. Xian Zhong, the peak master of Xianming Peak of Jiaxin College? The martial saint muttered in a low voice. Xianzhong and Xiaoyu were both peak masters of Jiaxin College. Why would Xianzhong suddenly appear and launch a sneak attack on Xiaoyu, causing him to be heavily injured? Zhuowen naturally noticed Xianzhong floating in the air. His gaze was extremely cold. This Xianzhong was too much. He actually dared to launch a sneak attack on Xiaoyu. Old man Xiao, take this snow lotus jade pill first. Zhuowen took out a pill from his spiritual ring and handed it to Xiaoyu. Xiaoyu was startled. Soon after, he nodded his head and received the medicinal pill from Zhuowen. As he placed it in his mouth, a surge of medicinal power spread out and circulated throughout Xiaoyu's body, causing his entire body to feel warm. Martial Uncle Xianzhong, what do you mean by this? Zhuowen said indifferently. What do I mean? You're a dog who deceives his master and kills his fellow disciples. Today, I'm here to get rid of you for Jiaxin College. Xianzhong's voice was extremely cold. Deceiving his master and killing his fellow disciples? However, Zhuowen laughed and said indifferently, it's clearly you who is abusing your position to avenge a private grudge for your own selfish reasons. Now you're saying it in such a dignified manner. Don't you find it laughable? Also, you launched a sneak attack on old man Xiao. Isn't that killing your fellow disciples? Do you still have any shame? Xianzhong narrowed his eyes and replied indifferently. Xiaoyu is a lunatic. I won't kill him. My target is you. If you die, everything will be over. Xianzhong's gaze landed on the martial saint not far away. He smiled and said, Martial saint, why don't we work together? This guy came to the martial saint tower and even defeated your head disciple Lung Quan. He doesn't put you in his eyes at all. Moreover, I know a little about that Lu Hantian's special physique. Even if I don't make a move, you'll make a move to snatch it. Why don't we work together? The martial saint raised his eyebrows and glanced at Xianzhong. He didn't expect Xianzhong to know his secret. Indeed, it was as Xianzhong said. He definitely wouldn't let Zhuowen take away Lu Hantian, because Lu Hantian was related to his opportunity to break through. The so-called molestation of the martial saint tower's young miss was just a reason he casually arranged to capture Lu Hantian. Their young miss wasn't poisoned by the insect corpse pill at all. However, he didn't expect that Lu Hantian would slip away halfway. What happened next was that Lu Hantian was brought back to the martial saint tower, and Zhuowen broke into the martial saint tower to save him. No matter what, this Zhuowen is still a disciple of the Divine Academy, right? If I kill him like this, won't the Divine Academy blame me? The martial saint narrowed his eyes. He naturally thought about capturing Lu Hantian, but he didn't plan to kill Zhuowen. After all, the latter was a genius of the Divine Academy. If he really killed him, it might alert the Saint Realm experts of the Divine Academy. Don't worry, he's just a personal disciple of the mysterious peak. If you help me kill this kid, the responsibility will be on my head at most. It won't involve you. Xianzhong sneered. The martial saint raised his eyebrows. If Xianzhong was willing to take all the responsibility, he didn't need to worry about anything. After all, Xianzhong was the peak master of the 9th peak in the inner courtyard. If he killed a personal disciple, he would at most be punished. He wouldn't be in danger of dying. If that's the case, we can work together. This kid is indeed a little arrogant. Although he has mastered the law of fire, his actions are extremely arrogant. If we don't teach him a lesson, it'll be hard to justify. The martial saint's mouth was full of coldness. He took a step forward and landed beside Xianzhong. A terrifying pressure flowed out. Xianzhong, you've gone too far. If you dare to kill Zhuowen, I'll report today's matter to the 3 martial uncles. Xiaoyu's face changed slightly as he shouted angrily. Xianzhong sneered. You can report it however you want. Today I'll definitely kill Zhuowen. He dared to kill Xianqi. Even if he doesn't die, he'll die. Brother martial saint, do it. Xiaoyu, you can help me stall him. I'll deal with that little bastard Zhuowen. Chapter 1396. The Death of Cold Spring. The martial saint nodded. The law of martial that he had comprehended was of a higher level than Xiaoyu's law of martial. If they were to fight, he would be completely capable of suppressing Xiaoyu. In addition, because of Xianzhong's sneak attack, Xiaoyu had suffered a serious injury. Even with the effect of the Snow Lotus Jade Lustrous Pill, the strength that he could unleash was extremely limited. Whoosh! Xiaoyu roared angrily. The law of fire rushed out from his body like a fire python and circled around his body. At the same time, wisps of void power gushed out from under his feet. Xiaoyu took a step forward and entered the void. In the next instant, he appeared in front of Xianzhong. Xianzhong narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "It seems like you have comprehended a lot of things in the empty space stone tablet. You can use the empty space stone tablet, but you can't stop me." Xianzhong sneered. The law of mysterious underworld gushed out. He took a step and passed by Xiaoyu. Xiaoyu originally wanted to chase after them, but the martial saint had already arrived. His right hand descended from the sky as martial law surged out, forming a mountain-like giant hand that smashed towards Xiaoyu. Boom! Boom! The battle between the two half-saints caused the heavens to collapse and the earth to rend, and the sun and moon to dim. Without exception, Xiaoyu was completely suppressed by the martial sage. However, as Xiaoyu controlled a trace of void energy, the martial sage was unable to take him down in a short period of time. "Little bastard, you will definitely die today." Xianzhong was very fast. He landed in front of Zhuowen in an instant. The Xianming law turned into countless black tentacles. They swept out and wrapped around Zhuowen from all directions. Heavenly Dragon Locking Seal. Zhuowen's eyes were dark and cold. A monstrous light erupted from the dragon's seal on his right hand. Soon after, countless thick chains shot out. At the same time, Zhuowen's left eye shot out a fiery light, bursting forth with a powerful law of fire that adhered to the chains, increasing their power by several times. Boom! Boom! The Heavenly Dragon Lock Seal and the mysterious underworld law collided with each other. Continuous explosions rang out. Every time the two collided, the aftershock produced could collapse space. Seeing this, many disciples of the Martial Saint Tower narrowed their eyes, and their faces were filled with shock. You've actually grasped the law of fire. Looks like that old fellow Xiaoyu taught it to you. As long as your cultivation reaches the 9th level of the Emperor Realm, you'll probably be able to directly advance to the half-step Saint Realm. Xianzhong squinted his eyes, which were filled with intense killing intent. Zhuowen's talent had already made him feel threatened. He had already grasped the Saint Rune Law at the 7th level Martial Emperor Realm. If he continued to cultivate, it was very likely that he would catch up to him. At that time, it would be very difficult for him to kill him. This brat must die. Thinking about this, the killing intent in Xianzhong exploded like a volcano. Boom! Immediately, the power of the dark underworld laws increased by several times, and suppressed the Heavenly Dragon Sealing Seal. Zhuowen's expression was slightly ugly. At the same time, he glanced at the extremely weak Lu Hantian behind him, and sighed softly. He said in a low voice, "I can only let the Buddhist avatar come here." In a mountain a few thousand miles away from the Martial Saint Tower, a majestic temple stood at the top of the mountain. White mist lingered around the temple, and one could vaguely see the outline of the temple. The area of the temple was very large. In front of the mountain gate, there was a plaque with the words Great Thunderclap Temple written on it. The calligraphy was like dragons and snakes, and the eyebrows were like dancing phoenixes. The identity of the temple was obvious. It was the Great Lane Temple, second only to Excellent Divine College in the Divine Netherworld. In the temple there was a huge pagoda. At the top of the pagoda, a figure was sitting cross-legged with golden light shining all over his body. There was a halo behind the figure's head, which made him look holy and clean. At a closer look, the figure wasn't old. He was about 23 or 24 years old. At this moment, his eyes were wide open and blazing golden light shone from them. "Buddhawen, what's wrong with you? You look uneasy today. Is there something on your mind?" Not far from the figure, there was a praying mat. An old monk wearing a kasaya was sitting cross-legged on it. His eyes were closed and he didn't open them. The words just now came from the mouth of this old monk. "Master Xianxian, I have some matters to take care of. I hope you can send me to the Martial Saint Tower." Buddha Wen said respectfully. The hunchbacked old monk in front of him wasn't simple. His cultivation was unfathomable, and he was the only saint in the Great Lane Temple. Master Xian Xian's attainments in space were very deep. Although he didn't fully comprehend the laws of space, it was already very impressive. In the Great Lane Temple, Master Xian Xian was practically a godlike existence. Master Xian Xian slowly put down the prayer beads in his hand and opened his eyes. He looked deeply at Buddha Wen and smiled. Karma is a cycle. Your karma is in the Martial Saint Tower. Go and remember to come back early. Buddha Wen was stunned. He immediately bowed and said in a deep voice, Thank you, Master. Master Xian Xian nodded. Then, he waved his sleeve, and a surge of spatial energy gushed out, enveloping Buddha Wen. Soon, Buddha Wen's figure disappeared from the top of the pagoda. Brother Hantian, you should leave this place first. The aftermath of my battle with Xian Zhong might affect you. While resisting Xian Zhong's attack, Zhuowen instructed Lu Hantian behind him. The latter nodded and staggered away from the battle between Xian Zhong and Zhuowen. Right now he was too weak. If he followed Zhuowen, he would only be a burden to the latter. Break! Xian Zhong shouted coldly. The Xianming law became even more violent, and it completely shattered the heavenly dragon lock seal. The power of the Xianming law came one after another, and it was like black raindrops that covered Zhuo Wen's entire body. Taisha Dragon Seal. Zhuowen didn't panic. He waved his right hand and countless blood chi spurted out, forming a huge blood dragon above his head. The Taisha Saint Dragon's huge dragon body coiled up layer by layer, like a coiling dragon, and surrounded Zhuowen in the middle. Boom! 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 The power of the mysterious underworld law arrived in an instant, and blasted on the Taisha Saint Dragon's shadow. However, it couldn't break the dragon's huge body. Old bastard Xian Zhong, where are you looking? Xian Zhong frowned slightly and stared at the Taisha Saint Dragon's shadow below. Unexpectedly, a familiar voice came from behind him. Xian Zhong suddenly turned his head, and was stunned to discover that Zhuowen had unknowingly appeared in front of him. At this moment, Zhuowen's body was covered with blood-red marks that looked like dazzling patterns. It was extremely strange and ferocious. Boom! Zhuowen threw out a punch. The power of the Taisha Dragon Seal combined with the law of fire made this punch extremely powerful. Xian Zhong was caught off guard. In a hurry, he stretched out his hands to meet Zhuowen's punch. Bang! Then, a white airwave with a radius of dozens of meters spread out in all directions. Xian Zhong groaned and retreated dozens of steps. Zhuowen actually forced a half-saint back? So terrifying? In an instant, the desolate ground became slightly silent. The various combat strengths that Zhuowen had displayed earlier were indeed slightly terrifying and shocking. He had defeated the invincible sovereign Lord Lung Quan, and now Xian Zhong, who had mastered the law of mysterious underworld. Not far away, Lung Quan's face turned ugly. At the same time, a trace of fear rose in his heart. He didn't expect Zhuowen to be so terrifying. I'll capture Lu Hantian. Let's see how Zhuowen can still be arrogant. Lung Quan's eyes flickered. In an instant, his attention fell on Lu Hantian, who was not far away from Zhuowen. He stepped into the air and flew towards Lu Hantian. Swoosh! The sound of something breaking through the air immediately attracted Zhuowen's attention. Then, he saw Lung Quan rushing towards Lu Hantian. His eyes were filled with shock and anger. Lung Quan, how dare you? Having said that, the purple lightning wings on Zhuowen's back spread open. He turned into a lightning shadow and tried to stop Lung Quan. Zhuowen, why are you in such a hurry to leave? Your opponent is me. Xian Zhong sneered and stood in front of Zhuowen. The terrifying law of mysterious underworld was like a wall, blocking in front of Zhuowen. At the same time, the law of mysterious underworld gathered on the surface of Xian Zhong's body and became even more violent. In the end, it gathered into a giant bird that covered the sky. The giant bird was formed by the law of mysterious underworld. When it spread its wings, it swept out a gale that contained a terrifying chill. Zhuowen took a few steps back and stared at the giant bird behind Xian Zhong. His eyes were solemn. It was probably Xian Zhong's armor soul that suppressed the giant bird. It seemed like Xianzhong was serious. Haha. Lu Hantian, you can't escape from my palm. On the other side, Lung Quan laughed and threw a palm strike. Immediately, Lu Hantian spat out a mouthful of blood and flew back. At the same time, Lung Quan grabbed Lu Hantian's neck with his right hand and looked at Zhuan provocatively. Zhuan, do you really think you're the savior of the world? You don't take my martial saint tower seriously at all. You even want to save Lu Hantian. You're just asking for death, Lung Quan sneered. His voice was filled with mockery. Let go of him or you'll die a horrible death, Zhuan said in a deep voice. The smile on Lung Quan's face grew wider. He said, Are you kidding? If you say I'll die a horrible death, then come and kill me. With that, Lung Quan threw a punch at Lu Hantian's abdomen. The latter's back bent, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Come and kill me. Lung Quan laughed loudly. His face was filled with pride. Obviously, the defeat at the hands of Zhuan had made him very angry. Now he was venting his anger on Lu Hantian. Puffed. Suddenly, the smile on Lung Quan's face froze. Then, a Buddhist commandment blade swept out from behind him and pierced through his chest. Blood splattered everywhere. Lung Quan spat out a mouthful of blood. He lowered his head and stared blankly at the Buddhist commandment blade that pierced through his chest. Then he slowly turned his head. Behind him, a young monk with a halo on the back of his head was staring at him indifferently. Who are you? Lung Quan's eyes were filled with fear. He had never seen this young monk behind him. Why did this person want to kill him? The person who will kill you. The Buddhist commandment blade in his hand suddenly swept out. Golden light shone brightly. Immediately, Lung Quan's body was torn into pieces. Blood mist filled the air and exploded. Ah! Chapter 1397. Saving a Life. Silence. The entire desolate land of the Martial Saint Tower was completely silent. One could even hear a pin drop. Even the Martial Saint and Xiaoyu, who were fighting not far away, stopped fighting and stared blankly at the scene. At this moment, Lung Quan was actually killed by a strange monk. This was truly unbelievable. You dare to kill Lung Quan? I'll kill you. The Martial Saint was silent for a moment. Then he roared toward the sky. His martial laws surged out and condensed into a several thousand feet tall illusory figure of a cultivator behind him. The illusory figure of the cultivator had blurry facial features. It had a muscular body. Every movement of its body contained a terrifying might. It was extremely frightening. Xiaoyu's expression changed slightly. He clenched his teeth and also unleashed his fire laws. They formed a huge fire dragon and surged toward the illusory figure of the cultivator. Scram! The martial saint shouted coldly. He leapt up and stood on the shoulder of the illusory figure of the cultivator. With a thought, the illusory figure of the cultivator's enormous fist rumbled and smashed into the fire dragon. Rumble! The illusory figure of the cultivator's might was extremely terrifying. With that punch, the fire dragon roared and collapsed inch by inch. Poochie! At the same time, Xiaoyu vomited a mouthful of blood. He fell from the sky and smashed into the ground. The martial saint did not pay any attention to Xiaoyu. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at the Buddhist rune. The illusory figure of the cultivator beneath his feet stepped forward. Every step caused the ground to tremble and rumble. In an instant he arrived before the Buddhist rune. His right hand pressed down from the sky. It rumbled like a mountain as it smashed toward the Buddhist rune. Amitabha, 10,000 Buddha's greeting. The Buddhist rune stood there quietly with his palms together. His eyes shone with Buddhist light. Instantly, illusory figures of ancient Buddhas appeared behind him. They were so densely packed that one could not see the end of them. Countless illusory figures of ancient Buddhas opened their eyes and shot out Buddhist light. The Buddhist light formed a huge bowl-shaped golden alms bowl. It enveloped the Buddhist rune and Lu Hantian, forming a golden defense. Rumble! The illusory figure of the cultivator's hand fell from the sky and landed on the bowl-shaped golden alms bowl. Then, an ear-piercing explosion sounded like an earthquake. However, the bowl-shaped golden alms bowl was like a solid rock, immovable like a mountain. Instead, it was the right hand of the martial artist's illusory figure that was directly repelled. Amitabha Sutra? Your Master Xian Xian from the temple? The martial saint was startled as he stared at the young monk with his palms together. The young monk was tall and slender, wearing a white monk robe. He held 2 strings of Buddha beads in his left hand, and a Buddhist commandment blade in his right. The Buddha, the martial word as his Buddha, was his underscore a Buddha's strength, was much stronger than a monarch of the same level. A 9th layer Buddha was comparable to an invincible monarch lord. Of course, if a Buddha had comprehended the power of law, his strength would be even more terrifying. Evidently, the young monk before him was a Buddha that had comprehended the power of laws. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to block the all-out attack of a martial saint. The Buddhist scriptures were formed from the Buddha's eye of the Buddha demon eye. He had a comprehension of the Buddhist Tao that was hard for ordinary people to reach. Furthermore, he was heavily nurtured by Grandmaster Xian Xian. It was not strange for him to reach the 9th layer of Buddha in just a few years. Fowen raised his head slightly and opened his golden eyes. He stared at the martial saint and said, "Saving a life is more meritorious than building a 7-storied pagoda. Martial saint, can you spare these people?" The moment he said that, the entire place fell silent. Many disciples of the martial saint tower stared at the young monk in front of them with strange gazes. This monk had just used his Buddhist commandment blade to kill Lung Quan. Moreover, he had taken Lung Quan's yuanying without any shame. Now he was talking about saving a life. The contrast was too great. There was no doubt that the young monk in front of him was an absolute weirdo. The martial saint's face turned green and purple, and finally, it turned red. The Buddhist words had deeply stimulated his soul, causing his killing intent to surge. "Are you mocking me? You killed my personal disciple, and now you want me to save a life? Do you take me for a fool? Even if you are the successor of Master Xian Xian, I will still kill you today." The martial saint's killing intent surged. His entire body merged with the martial artist's silhouette. Immediately, the martial artist's silhouette became more and more solid. Its muscles swelled. It was originally a silhouette, but now it seemed more and more solid. The martial artist's silhouette also became more and more solid. The aura on its surface was also extremely terrifying. It was as powerful and profound as a 10,000-foot tall mountain. "Kill!" The martial saint threw out a punch and heavily smashed onto the surface of the bowl-shaped golden alms bowl. Muffled sounds of impact rang out once again. The bowl-shaped golden alms bowl, which was originally as immovable as a mountain, began to tremble under the martial saint's punches. However, it was still barely able to hold on. Not far away, Zhuowen frowned. The martial saint's strength was somewhat out of his expectations. His strength was most likely above Xianzhong's. No wonder Xiao Yu had praised the martial saint's talent. The law of martialism that he had comprehended should not be a simple law of martialism. "Zhuowen, where are you looking? Die for me." A cold voice rang out. Then Xianzhong rushed over like a vigorous cheetah. He was as fast as lightning and instantly arrived in front of Zhuowen. The giant bird formed by the law of mysterious underworld followed closely behind him. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. The power of the void filled the air and attached itself to the purple lightning wings. Instantly, his speed reached the extreme as he escaped into the void. In the next moment, he appeared a few hundred meters away. "Sigh, I can only use that thing. I have to end this quickly." Zhuowen sighed softly. He raised his hands. Instantly, terrifying ice and fire energies burst out from his body. One was the dark cold poison, and the other was the 9 flames karmic fire. Both of them were heavenly rank energies, and their power was terrifying. Then Zhuowen combined the 2 energies. With crackling sounds, the dark cold poison and the 9 flames karmic fire combined to form a palm-sized palace. On the surface of the palace, 9 colors were constantly changing. Within the 9 colors, there was a strand of black light that flashed repeatedly. What is that?" Xianzhong narrowed his eyes and stared at the palace in Zhuowen's right hand. A tinge of fear rose in his heart. In the ice-fire palace, he could feel the aura of the ice and fire dual hall in the inner yard. Ice-fire palace? Zhuowen ignored Xianzhong's question. He clenched his right hand and swung it. Instantly, The ice-fire palace in his palm cut through the void and landed in front of Xianzhong. Xianzhong did not dare to be negligent. He waved his right hand and commanded the giant bird behind him to attack the ice-fire palace. Expand! Zhuowen faintly spat out this word. Then the ice-fire palace swelled to the extreme. In the end, it swelled from the size of a palm to several thousand feet in size. It seemed to have transformed into a new ice and fire dual extreme hall. In the blink of an eye, the ice-fire palace suppressed the giant bird. The latter did not even have time to react before it was trapped in the palace. What? Shock appeared in Xianzhong's eyes. He hadn't expected such an unforeseen event. He was just about to retreat when Zhuo Wen's indifferent voice resounded once more. Explode! Rumble! An earth-shaking explosion occurred. Before Xianzhong could leave the ice and fire palace, the latter had already burst apart. Terrifying 9 types of flames rushed out and instantly swallowed Xianzhong's entire body. Ah! Amidst the explosion, a miserable cry resounded across the sky. The owner of the miserable cry was Xianzhong. The explosion lasted for 10 breaths of time, before the explosive energy gradually weakened. After the explosive energy faded, an extremely miserable figure appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The figure was none other than Xianzhong. At that moment, Xianzhong's clothes were tattered and he was bald. His skin was charred black and he looked extremely frightening. Ah! Xianzhong roared towards the sky. His roar was filled with rage. He was actually in such a miserable state in the hands of a junior like Zhuowen. It was a humiliation to him. Zhuowen, you little bastard. I will definitely kill you. Then, I will pull out your tendons and peel off your bones. I will skin you alive and let you beg me to kill you. Xianzhong was almost crazy. His eyes turned red as he looked around, searching for Zhuowen's figure. Old dog, where are you looking? Your grandfather is above you. A mocking voice sounded. Xianzhong raised his head abruptly. He was stunned when he saw Zhuowen floating in the sky. His right hand was holding a palm-sized ice-fire palace. Swoosh. Perhaps because Zhuowen noticed Xianzhong's gaze, the smile on his face grew even wider. With a swing of his right hand, the ice and fire palace flew out of his hand. It instantly turned into a giant palace that was hundreds of feet tall, suppressing Xianzhong inside. Explode! Zhuowen escaped into the void and disappeared from the palace. Then the ice-fire palace in the void exploded again. This time, the explosion was even more terrifying. The explosion spread out and covered an area of a few thousand feet. It almost covered the sky where the Marshal Saint Tower was. It was filled with dazzling light. On the wasteland, many disciples of the Marshal Saint Tower twitched their eyelids. They had to admit that Xianzhong was unlucky to be hit by the same attack twice. Moreover, the might of these 2 moves was so terrifying that even a semi-sage expert could die. So it was likely that Xianzhong would be in a precarious situation. At the same time, Zhuowen calmly took out a nascent soul from his spiritual ring. It was the nascent soul of Xianqi that Zhuowen killed in the inner yard. Xianqi was a 9th-level martial emperor. Moreover, he was not an ordinary 9th-level martial emperor. His nascent soul contained an enormous amount of energy. Zhuowen took out the Fuxi cauldron without hesitation and stuffed it into the Fuxi cauldron. Suddenly, the Fuxi cauldron shone brightly. Rumble! A huge hand stretched out from the cauldron. Then a second huge hand stretched out. 2 mountain-like arms stretched out and reached into the explosion. They grabbed a figure that was in a sorry state. Upon closer inspection, the figure was none other than Xianzhong. At this moment, Xianzhong's aura was extremely weak. After being attacked by the ice-fire palace twice, he was exhausted even though he was a half-saint who had mastered the law. Old man Xiao, the inner yard won't blame me for killing this old dog, right? Zhuowen suddenly asked Xiaoyu, who was severely injured not far away. At this moment, Xiaoyu was stunned like a statue. The scene just now was really shocking. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.